I was staking the tomato plants in my backyard when my phone rang. "Dad, don't come over this weekend," my son said. "You don't fit the image we're trying to project." I stared at the tomatoes. "What are you talking about? We have important investors coming, just stay home." The call ended. 15 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. "Please don't be angry," my daughter-in-law texted. "I need to see you tonight. Don't tell him." An hour later, she sat across from me at my kitchen table, placed a USB drive in front of me, and whispered words that changed everything. The phone call that would unravel everything arrived at 7:32 p.m. on a Friday in early September, cutting through the only peace I'd known in 3 years. I was out on my back porch in River Oaks watching the last light drain from the sky above the rose garden I'd tended since my wife passed. The phone vibrated against the iron patio table and my son's name lit up the screen. "Hey, Derek," I said, expecting the usual Friday check-in. Maybe an invitation to Sunday dinner. Maybe a question about Cora's upcoming birthday. "Welcome back to Grandpa's Revenge. I'm glad you're here. If this is your first time, pull up a chair and stay a while. Before we go any further, if these stories speak to you, a quiet tap on subscribe is the best way to make sure the next one finds you." Now, a question to sit with as you listen: when someone you love lets you down, do you tend to confront them right away, or do you go quiet and start gathering your proof? Drop your answer in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know. One small note before we begin: some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. What matters is the truth at the heart of it. "Dad, stay away from the house this weekend." That boardroom clip in his voice, the one he used on people beneath him. I straightened up. "Why is that son B? Nadine thinks the way you come across reflects badly on us." The words struck me like a fist. I gazed out at the rose blooms, their color draining in the evening light, and felt something cold take root behind my sternum. "I see," I said, keeping my voice flat. "We've got serious investors coming Sunday. Surely you understand." Oh, I understood. I understood that 8 years ago I'd written the check for his wedding, watched him and Nadine exchange vows beneath that pergola at the Arboretum. I understood that 6 years back I'd handed them $60,000 money pulled from a retirement account built across 28 years of government work so they could put roots down in West University Place. I understood that my granddaughter Cora, 8 years old, rang me every Tuesday evening to tell me what happened at school. And I understood that my only child had just classified me as a liability. "Fine," I said. "I won't come." "Good. We'll talk." He hung up. I stayed in my seat, phone in hand, while the light left the garden entirely. Since when did my son tally a man's value by how he looks in a room rather than by what he gave up to build that man's life? The roses needed attention. I'd let it slide, and suddenly the work felt like a necessity. Something for my hands. Something to drown out the offhand contempt I'd just heard in Derek's voice. I pushed up from the chair and headed to the tool shed along the garage wall. That's when something old woke up inside me. 28 years. That's the span I put in at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division before I retired at 61. Not the audit side, the enforcement side, the investigators who don't chase paperwork, we assemble prosecution cases, wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion woven into organized crime. Nearly 3 decades across the table from well-dressed men who were certain the system couldn't touch them, watching the moment that certainty collapsed when they saw we'd accounted for every cent. 43 cases, 43 convictions, schemes running into the millions shell companies in the Cayman's real estate empires raised on phantom income. None of them ever spotted me coming. I stepped away early to be beside my wife Vivian through the 2 years cancer spent taking her from me. After she was gone, I stayed out. Settled here in River Oaks, withdrew from the world, kept up the roses Vivian had planted, became the quiet widower on Kirby Drive neighbor who nods never pries. Derek never thought to ask what those 28 years actually looked like. He knew I'd been with the IRS, taxes, right, Dad? He left it there, no follow-up. Never gave a second glance to the service commendation medals locked in the glass case in my study. Never stopped to wonder why a retired government man pores over financial documents with the precision of someone trained to hunt lies inside columns of figures. I saw no reason to enlighten him. Standing there tonight staring at those medals, I was glad of it. Something moved in me that had been absent for 4 years. That cool, deliberate focus, the kind that used to arrive when a case crossed from abstract into real. When you understand that the man on the other side of the table isn't simply violating statutes, he's gutting people's lives and counting on getting away clean. Derek Colby, 40 years old, CEO of Colby Capital Partners. My son, the small boy who would doze off leaning against me during Sunday afternoon baseball. The teenager who phoned me at midnight from his dorm the night his first girlfriend ended things. The young man who broke down at his mother's graveside and kept hold of my hand through every word of the eulogy. That man had just decided I was an embarrassment. For 3 years after Vivian died, I'd told myself that quiet was enough. I was mistaken. I moved back to the porch and lowered myself into the chair as full dark came on. The rose garden had vanished into black shapes only against the fence line. A dog sounded off somewhere nearby. A set of headlights rolled across the lawn and kept going. I turned over the idea of calling Derek, of driving across town and making him face me. I turned over a lot of ideas. Then the phone vibrated. Text message, Nadine's name. I pulled it open. "Please don't be angry, Dad. I need to see you tonight." I read it again, a third time. 2 messages, 15 minutes between them. "My sons, keep your distance, you embarrass me. My daughter-in-law is 36 years old, come see me tonight." A current of fear running underneath every word. I went very still. The stillness of interrogation rooms, the stillness that came over me when a witness said something that sat wrong against the numbers in front of me. The stillness that told me a break was coming. Nadine had never reached out to me at this hour. She had never opened with "don't be angry." And across 8 years of marriage to my son, she had never once requested a private meeting after dark. I typed, "When?" The answer was immediate. "Can I come now? Derek is in San Antonio until tomorrow." I checked the clock. 7:47 p.m. My son was 3 states away, and his wife was asking to come to my house without his knowledge. The word choice, the hour, the barely contained urgency, none of it read like small talk. I typed back, "Come over, I'll be here." Then I settled into the chair and watched the darkness over the garden while something long dormant in my mind began turning over again. There was trouble in my son's household. Something Nadine couldn't speak with Derek in earshot. Whatever it was, it had frightened her badly enough to reach out behind his back. I had 45 minutes. I used them putting myself back in the frame of mind I hadn't needed in years. The bell rang at 9:10 p.m. When I opened the door and saw Nadine in the porch light, I knew something inside that house had already fractured. 36 years old, my daughter-in-law for 8 years. Hair yanked back without care, not a trace of makeup. Her fingers were clenched so hard around her keys the metal had left marks in her skin. Before Derek, she'd been a financial analyst at Morgan Stanley Sharp, a woman who walked into rooms with confidence. The woman on my doorstep looked like she'd been hollowed out. "Dad," her voice cracked on the word. "It wasn't me. I never told him that. He put my name on it." I moved back from this door. "Come inside, sweetheart." I read her the way I used to read witnesses, eyes tracking straight, not sliding away, voice holding despite the emotion pressing behind it. She was giving me the truth, and she was afraid. I brought her to the kitchen table, the one where Vivian and I had shared coffee every single morning. Nadine settled into the chair, laid her keys on the surface, pressed her hands flat. "Do you have 10 minutes? "Far more than that," I told her. "Go back to the start." What she told me over the following 2 hours rearranged everything. She laid it out the way a person does when they've been mentally rehearsing for a long time. Financial control came first, no accounts she could access independently, only the cash Derek rationed out when he saw fit. Then the spyware tracking software planted on her iPhone, sitting undetected inside a health app she'd never chosen to install, found 3 months ago. I knew the program on site. It had turned up in a wire fraud case I'd worked in 2018. After that, the isolation. Derek had chipped away at her professional life, undermined her friendships, engineered reasons for her to skip family events. One day she'd looked up and there was nobody left to call except the man who'd been engineering that outcome all along. "There's something else," she said, quieter now. "A woman. Simone. She's at his firm. I have photographs. She didn't produce them, I didn't ask. And then the house itself, the home I'd helped them purchase. Derek had set a sale in motion. She'd found the paperwork, refinancing filings, estimated sale figures, everything advancing without her name on anything, without a word to her. 2 weeks ago, I brought it up to him directly," she said. "After that, things turned. That's when he started bringing you into it. I was writing on a blue legal pad, not the way a father writes, the way an investigator does." Every element she described snapped into the same shape I'd encountered 43 times across my career: fraud, money laundering, concealed assets. Corner the target, choke, the money sever outside contact, then move. How many times had I built a case around men running exactly this sequence and never once sat there thinking my own flesh and blood was capable of the same? He's been looking at assisted living facilities for you, Nadine said, her words accelerating now. I found the brochures 3 days ago, high-end places, $8,000 a month, and he's drawing up something he wants you to sign. My pen went still. What kind of document? I'm not certain, but he brought papers by last week, didn't he? Said it had to do with medical insurance getting your affairs properly arranged. I reached back through the week. 7 days ago, a Wednesday evening, Derek had come by with Cora and let her wander the garden. He'd given me a brown accordion folder, mentioned updating beneficiary designations, making sure things were tidy. I'd set it in the desk drawer and moved on, never opened it. I haven't signed anything, I said. Good. Her voice dropped until I could barely hear it. Don't touch it. Why not? Last Thursday night I was there when he got on the phone. I was upstairs. He assumed I'd gone to sleep. His office door hadn't latched all the way. She stopped mid-sentence and closed her eyes. He said once the old man signs, we can move the capital in 48 hours. Clean transfer. A son steps in to manage an aging father's finances. Nobody blinks. The kitchen held its breath. A car drifted past outside. The refrigerator kept its low hum. 11 o'clock came and went. I studied Nadine, really studied her. 8 years as my son's wife. No job because he'd talked her into leaving Morgan Stanley for the family he'd said. No account of her own, no one to call, nowhere to go, and there she sat in my kitchen at 11:15 on a Friday night telling me her husband had both of us in his sights. Who was he on the phone with? I asked. I don't know, but Dad... She leaned toward me, her eyes raw and red. I can't tell you what exactly he's planning, but that document isn't any insurance form, and whatever amount needs 2 days to move it isn't pocket change. The past 3 months assembled in my mind. Derek pulling away, dinners that never happened, conversations that went sideways, quiet probing questions about my retirement accounts, my portfolio, my health. 28 years of watching that same playbook from the other side of the table. Nadine, I said carefully, how much do you actually know about what I did before I retired? She hesitated. You were IRS, taxes, something like that. Criminal investigation, I said. Financial fraud prosecution, 3 decades constructing cases against men who believed they could strip people of their money and shelter themselves behind legal paperwork. Her eyes went wide. I've encountered this before, I went on. Many times. And you're right, whatever he needs me to sign, it has nothing to do with insurance. She got to her feet, reaching for her keys. I have to be home before he tries to reach me. As far as he knows, I'm picking up groceries. I walked her out. She pulled me into a brief, urgent embrace, then let go. Don't sign it, Dad, she said. Whatever he does, don't sign it. I watched her taillights shrink down Kirby Drive. Then I threw the deadbolt and made my way to the home office. The brown accordion folder was right where I'd left it, third drawer on the left, exactly as I'd placed it 7 days ago. I drew it out, settled into my chair, and clicked on the lamp. My son had handed me a document. Time to read it as an IRS criminal investigation agent reads one, not as a father. I flipped it open. The opening line read, Durable Power of Attorney. Something iced over inside me. There at 11:45 p.m., in the hard wash of the desk lamp, I worked through every line of what Derek had called insurance paperwork. By the end, the picture was merciless, a legal instrument engineered to strip me of everything I owned. Durable power of attorney. That phrase sat at the top of the page, in precise, legal typeface, drafted by some corporate attorney whose name I'd never heard. I moved through it the way I once worked financial records in interrogation rooms, sentence by sentence, hunting for what the language concealed. Comprehensive authority over all financial accounts, investments and real estate transactions, full medical decision-making power, immediate effect upon signature, no end date, no clause requiring a physician to certify I'd lost capacity. One signature from me and Derek held the keys to everything: my pension, my savings, the proceeds from selling our DC house after Vivian passed. $2.3 million. Every dollar built across 3 decades, everything we'd set aside to leave our family. All it needed was my signature and a notary stamp. I set the paper down and stepped out to the back porch. The September dark had swallowed the rose garden, only shapes remained against the fence. I stood there and let myself think about Vivian, really think about her for the first time in days. She'd been out here beside me 3 years ago, putting those roses in the ground a month before the diagnosis. She'd chosen every variety mapped where each one would go. This is where we'll have coffee when you retire, she'd told me. You can finally relax. She never got that chance. And now the son she'd raised was maneuvering to take the one thing she'd left me, the right to grow old on my own terms. Every choice remaining to me, where I lived, what I spent, whether I ended up in some facility at $8,000 a month while he drained my accounts to patch whatever damage he'd done, all of it would pass to him. I went back inside and rang a number that had sat untouched for 18 months. Clifford Baxter answered on the first ring. Harlan, it's after midnight. What's wrong? Clifford was 64, a former IRS criminal investigation supervisory special agent who'd retired 2 years after me. Retirement hadn't held him the way it held me. He consulted for DOJ carrying active investment fraud cases. 15 years working shoulder to shoulder, 23 prosecutions built together. After 25 years of knowing each other, he understood I never called without serious cause. There's a company I need to walk you through, I said. Colby Capital Partners. Silence. Then your son's firm. Yes. What's happened? I laid it out, not as a father, as an agent briefing a senior colleague. The dismissive call, Nadine's visit, the systematic abuse, the power of attorney, the overheard exchange about moving capital in 48 hours. Facts only, zero emotion. When I finished, Clifford went quiet. Do you have an open case? I asked. What can you pull, Harlan? He said slowly. Your son's company. I came across that name in a preliminary SEC review file about 3 months ago. Still in review, no formal investigation opened, but it's flagged. The room felt colder. How preliminary? Routine compliance sweep triggered by investor complaint patterns. No Wells notice, no formal enforcement started. But if your account is right, if he's moving to reach your assets within 48 hours of getting that POA, he isn't bracing for an audit. He's bracing for collapse. Once the old man signs, we can move the capital in 48 hours. Nadine's words were still in my ear. Can you get into the SEC file? I asked. No. Different agency, different jurisdiction. But I have an active DOJ matter investment advisor, fraud Houston-based defendants. I can legally run public record queries and cross-match analytical data within those boundaries. You provide analytical guidance. That's all legal. I understood. Clifford would stay inside his case's lane. I'd work the analysis. We wouldn't cross any lines. Everything that's publicly available on Colby Capital Partners, I said. I'll have preliminary findings by morning. Clifford said form ADV filings. Secretary of State records, any civil litigation on Pacer. But Harlan, he paused. What if the SEC moves from preliminary review to formal investigation? Everything freezes. Assets, documents, testimony. You lose control of the narrative. And if you're right about what he's planning, if he's about to move money illegally using your power of attorney, we're talking elder financial abuse stacked on top of whatever securities violations already exist. The SEC already knows. How long do I have? I asked. Impossible to say. SEC preliminary reviews can run 6 months or wrap in 6 days. One more investor complaint, someone inside who decides to talk, one careless move by Derek, any of it could push escalation to tomorrow. I looked at the power of attorney on my desk. My son had written this, carried it into my house, lied about what it was, and sat waiting for me to surrender everything Vivian and I had built. I need to protect Nadine, I said, and I need to know how many others he's hurt. I'll start pulling records tonight, Clifford said. But Harlan, listen to me. Time is the one thing you don't have. The call ended. I sat with the dark window in front of me, listening to the house settle. Clifford was right. The SEC was already circling. Federal investigators were already looking at Colby Capital Partners. If they escalated before I could cover Nadine and lock down evidence, the machinery of federal law would freeze everything, including any chance to shield my granddaughter from the fallout. Hours, maybe days, not weeks. I picked up the power of attorney and secured it in my desk drawer. My son was not getting that signature. Not tonight, not ever. But stonewalling him alone wasn't enough. If Derek was desperate enough to weaponize his own wife and come hunting in his father's accounts, he'd find another angle. I needed to know what he'd done, who else he'd hurt, how far down it went, and I needed it by morning. I opened my laptop and started composing an email to Clifford covering every detail from Nadine's visit, names, dates, amounts, patterns, everything that might matter when the federal investigation arrived, because it was coming. The only question was whether I'd be ready. The email landed at 8:17 a.m. on Saturday morning while I was pouring my second cup of coffee. A confirmation from Magnolia Pines Senior Living. A facility tour next Wednesday arranged by the family, sent to an address I hadn't touched in 2 years. I set the coffee pot down and stared at the screen. That message had been routed to my old official IRS criminal investigation contact address, the one I'd used for 28 years, the one that still forwarded to my personal inbox, because I'd never bothered to shut it down. Never shut it down. That was my oversight, or maybe my instinct. Every morning I pulled it up out of sheer professional reflex, the same routine I'd kept during my years in D.C. Derek must have lifted the address off some stale contact list. It never crossed his mind that I still had eyes on that inbox. He believed he was operating clean. Dear Mr. Colby, the message read, "This confirms your scheduled tour of Magnolia Pines Senior Living on Wednesday, September 13th at 2 p.m. The family has requested information regarding our memory care wing and private suite options. We look forward to welcoming you." 3 times I read it, then the whole architecture snapped into focus, cold, precise, awful. Wednesday he'd walk me through the place, the rooms, the staff, the monthly costs, then Friday maybe the weekend. Return with the power of attorney press until I signed. Get me admitted the week after, before I could clear my head or reach a single person I trusted. He'd engineered the whole sequence before he ever slid that document across the table to me. This wasn't a man acting out of desperation. This was a man who planned. How many hours had gone into this? Booking the facility, drawing up the POA, crafting the story he'd feed Nadine, rehearsing just the right dismissive tone for a phone call, and still dialing his father on a Friday evening as though the world was perfectly fine. I forwarded the email to Clifford and kept it to 1 sentence. He built this whole thing before he had my signature. Then I went back to the kitchen table and sat with the silence. Clifford reached me at 2 o'clock that afternoon on Zoom. When his face came up on the screen, I noticed how time had worked on him, more silver in his hair. Deeper lines, but those eyes were the same ones that had never missed a lie across an interrogation table. "Got the public record results," he said. "No greeting, no lead-up. You'll want to be sitting." "Already am." "Then brace yourself." His screen replaced his face. A spreadsheet filled my monitor, transaction logs, account numbers, columns of dates, columns of figures. Old habits engaged before he spoke a single word. My eyes moved down the rows the way they always had. Colby Capital Partners has been showing severely irregular movement between client accounts for the past 18 months. Clifford said, his voice flattening into that detached prosecutorial register we both knew well. Fresh investor money is funding payouts to people who've been in longer. The stated account balances bear no resemblance to actual holdings. Textbook shuffling. My chest went tight. Net loss $3.2 million. He let it sit there. "Harlan, this is a Ponzi scheme. Your son is running a Ponzi scheme." I got up and went to the window. The September light was still and bright over the lawn. Somewhere nearby, a neighbor ran a mower. Everything outside was ordinary. Everything inside me was not. How many investors? At least 23 households I can pull from public filings. Mostly older people, retirement savings, pension rollovers. The kind of capital that once it's gone, there's no replacing. 23 families. Most of them seniors. People who reminded me of myself. "Walk me through the transaction flow." Clifford brought up a diagram. I watched what the money actually did. Fresh deposits funneled straight through to satisfy withdrawal demands from the earlier crowd. I knew that diagram by heart. 43 times over my career, I'd worked cases built on exactly that pattern. I'd stood in courtrooms while those men were sentenced. Not once did I picture my son's name where theirs had been. When did it begin? Pattern suggests 18 months back, possibly 2 years. Something broke down, and whatever he was actually investing in, bad calls, market exposure, it almost doesn't matter now. Rather than absorbing the loss and shutting the fund down, he started robbing Peter to pay Paul. That wheel, once it turns, never turns the other direction. Every rotation demands a larger injection just to hold the thing together right up until it can't. "Until it collapses," Clifford said. "And Harlan, that SEC preliminary review I flagged. They're drawing the same conclusions. They haven't pulled the trigger on formal enforcement yet, but they will." "How much runway does he have?" Clifford settled back. "Months, could be weeks. The moment they upgrade to a formal investigation, every account, every asset, every operation gets frozen. After that, Wells notice enforcement action, then the criminal referral lands at DOJ, wire fraud, securities fraud, mail fraud. We're talking federal charges carrying multi-year sentences." The POA was sitting locked in my desk drawer. The Wednesday tour was still on the calendar. The 48-hour window Nadine had overheard Derek describing. $2.3 million, I said, saying it slowly like I was measuring it. "Just about enough to fill the gap," Clifford said. "Not entirely, but close. Enough to quiet the investors making the most noise. Enough to satisfy the most urgent withdrawal demands. Buy him a few more months before the SEC uncovers the trail. Harlan, this isn't greed driving your son. He's coming after your retirement because federal prison is the alternative. The temperature in that room seemed to drop 10 degrees. His plan was to have me committed, I said. Seize control of my finances through the POA. Get the money moved in 48 hours and use it to paper over everything. Yes, and Nadine, Cora. When the whole structure falls, what's left for them? They lose everything. The house, all their accounts, anything held in Derek's name. Federal prosecutors chasing a Ponzi scheme claw back whatever they can reach. An innocent wife, children, none of that changes the math. Every dollar goes to the victims. I pulled my chair back in. Harlan, Clifford said quietly but without softening it, your son doesn't just want your money. He needs your money to stay out of federal prison. I shut the laptop. The house held its silence around me. The mower outside kept going. Life as usual, right on the other side of the glass. My son, my only child, had constructed a $3.2 million fraud on the backs of elderly people. And when the ground started giving way beneath him, he looked around for one last target. He looked at his father. I stayed in that chair a long time, not moving, watching the light travel across the floor as the afternoon wore on. I was staking the tomato plants in my backyard at 4:30 Saturday afternoon when Dex Whitmore came across the yard with 2 cups of coffee, the kind of unannounced gesture that between men like us signals there's something that needs to be said. Dex was 67, a retired FBI supervisory agent, 5 years my neighbor. The friendship we'd built was the kind that grows between career federal agents, few words exchanged. No wasted motion, but completely dependable when stakes were real. He put a cup in my hand and looked toward the garden. That expression's back, Harlan, the one you used to wear when a case stopped being simple. I straightened up. I need a discreet public background check run on a name. Derek's business partner. Dex didn't reach for a reason. That was how it worked between us, you asked, and the other man moved. No preliminary questions required. Name, he said. Pacer State Records, SEC Enforcement Registries, open source, all of it, 24 hours. I gave him the name. Then I said, Norbert Fenn, my chess partner, reached out last week with some pointed questions about Colby Capital Partners. At the time, I let it pass. That landed. We both felt it. Norbert was 72 years old, a retired accountant. Meticulous, cautious, a man who'd spent his life being careful with numbers. Exactly the profile Derek would have sought out. You're thinking he's caught up in this? Dex asked. It's looking that way. A slow nod. Records by morning. Once he'd gone, I pulled out my phone and texted Norbert, Your questions about Colby Capital, I need you to call me. His reply was almost instant. Tomorrow afternoon. Serious matter to discuss. 2 retired federal men, coffee on a back porch on a quiet Saturday. No contract. No chain of command. Just the understanding, wordless, unshakable, that when a colleague reaches out, you answer. Then Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, I met Nadine at a small coffee shop near her church 3 kilometers from Sugar Land. Derek was due back from San Antonio at 11 o'clock. We had exactly 1 hour. She came through the door in a baseball cap and sunglasses, found my table, sat down without a word, and set a small USB drive on the iron patio table between us. Dad, she said, her voice low, there's something you don't know. I've been getting ready. 8 months. I looked at the drive. Black plastic, barely larger than my thumbnail. What's on it? 847 files. Every transaction, every transfer, every account he tried to hide. I used a separate tablet, paid for it in cash over 2 years of setting aside what I could. Derek has access to my iPhone. He has no idea this device exists. Each night after he was asleep, I went through bank statements, investment records, his correspondence, and backed it all to an iCloud account he can't touch. I closed my fingers around the drive, then looked at her. Not the way a father-in-law looks at his daughter-in-law, but the way you assess someone who's been running a covert operation alone. You ran this for 8 months with him monitoring your phone, locking down the money, keeping you from anyone who might help. She nodded once. You outperformed most trained agents I've worked with. Something moved through her eyes, the beginning of tears, but she held them. I had no endgame, she admitted. I just understood that if a door ever opened, I'd need something real to walk out with. It's real, I told her, and what you don't yet know is how bad it actually is. I laid out everything Clifford had found, the Ponzi scheme, 23 families, the SEC already circling. The color left her face. Oh God, Cora. When this comes down, and it will come down, Cora is not going to be underneath it, I said. That's exactly what this evidence is for. We are going to protect her. She nodded, dabbing at her eyes. 847 pieces of evidence, each one a brick. Nadine had quietly pried loose from the walls Derek had built around her life. Now she was placing the entire blueprint in my hands. Then something shifted in her face. A darker current moved through it. There's one more thing, she said. I waited. He's trying to borrow more money. My chest went tight. From who? Not from someone. Against something. She reached for the hidden tablet and pulled up a photograph of a letter. Bank letterhead, loan application. I found this in his correspondence. It appears to involve our house. I studied the screen. A second mortgage. Not a refinance, a new loan drawn against the home equity. The house where Nadine and Cora lived. The house I had helped them purchase. How much? She scrolled down. $380,000. The figure landed like something physical. Derek wasn't simply targeting my retirement. He wasn't simply defrauding 23 families. He was preparing to leverage his own daughter's home, the place where Cora slept at night, believing her world was solid and secure. The application is still pending, Nadine said. But Dad, if he forges my signature the way he's put words in my mouth about you, he can't obtain a mortgage without your consent, I said. State law requires spousal authorization unless he holds power of attorney over your finances. Which he's been pushing for, she said quietly, telling people I'm too unstable to make sound financial decisions. I looked at the USB drive sitting on the iron patio table between us. 847 files, 8 months of clandestine work, and now this proof that Derek was moving to strip his own child's future out from under her. We have about 10 minutes before I need to leave, Nadine said. He'll call if I'm late. I pocketed the drive and got to my feet. Go home, act normal. And Nadine, she looked up at me. You're not alone anymore. Do you understand that whatever comes next, you are not facing it alone? She nodded, then walked out. I stayed at the table another minute, feeling the drive's small weight in my pocket. $380,000 against Cora's home. 23 defrauded families. My own retirement in his crosshairs. And somewhere threaded through all of it, possibly Norbert, a man who trusted me, who may have placed money with my son's firm because the Colby name carried meaning for him. Derek wasn't only dismantling his own life. He was dismantling everyone within reach. And he had no idea that the very people he'd targeted were assembling a case against him methodically, with exactly the kind of precision he'd once used to construct the fraud itself. The phone rang at 3 p.m. Sunday afternoon. Dex Whitmore calling with the background check results. Before he said a word, the pause told me what kind of news was coming. Your son's partner, Ronan Sperry, age 45. He has a 2018 criminal conviction for securities fraud in Dallas, Texas. Sentenced to 18 months supervised probation, released in 2020. He legally changed his name that same year and moved to Houston in 2021. My grip tightened on the phone. He co-founded Colby Capital Partners with your son in early 2022, Chief Operations Officer. Does Derek know about the conviction? I doubt it. The name change was executed through a sealed court order. Unless your son ran a federal background check, he'd have had no way to find it. I thought about Derek, 40 years old, sharp in certain ways, dangerously blind in others. Harlan, Dex said, his voice measured. Your son isn't the architect of this thing. He's the facade. A career fraudster needed cover, a clean name, a respected family behind him, someone whose background would deflect scrutiny. Derek fit that perfectly. My son wasn't evil, he was dangerously, catastrophically out of his depth, and a predator had spotted that vulnerability from a distance. Thank you, Dex. Watch yourself. I set down the phone and sat still. Derek was no mastermind. He was a mark, a useful figure with the right surname and enough ambition to be steered into constructing a Ponzi scheme without ever fully grasping what he was building. At 5 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Norbert Fenn stood on my porch, car keys in hand. 72 years old, a retired manufacturing executive, my chess partner every Wednesday for 5 years. Steady eyes, careful hands, the kind of man who had built a deliberate life and planned a deliberate retirement. He looked as though he'd aged since I'd last really looked at him. Norbert, come in. We settled in the living room, him on the couch, me in the chair, the same positions we'd occupied hundreds of times over chessboards, except today there was no board between us. Got your text, he said. About Colby Capital. I nodded. You brought it up last week. I should have paid closer attention. He dropped his gaze to his hands. Harlan, I need to tell you something, and I need you to understand that none of this is on you. My chest tightened. 6 months ago, your son came to me with an investment proposition. Colby Capital Partners' presentations projected returns. All of it looked credible. But the real reason I put money in, he stopped, drew a breath. He told me my dad backs me 100%. You know, Harlan Colby wouldn't let me build something dishonest. And I believe that because I've known you for 5 years. I know your history, what you did for a living, so when your son told me you stood behind him, I didn't even check. I wrote the check. How much? I asked quietly. $400,000, my retirement savings. The room went cold. Norbert, I had no knowledge that firm existed. I never endorsed it. I never backed him in any way. I know that now, he said. I started seeing it about 3 months ago when the reported return stopped making sense against reality. I ran the numbers myself. They didn't hold together. I brought in a private attorney 2 months back. She suspected fraud but said the documentation wasn't there yet to prove it. Why didn't you come to me? He smiled a tired, sad smile. Because you're my friend, Harlan. I didn't want to drag this into your family. I kept thinking maybe I'd made an error somewhere. And if I hadn't, I didn't want to be the person who told you your son was stealing from people. How many layers of betrayal can stack on top of one another before the whole thing becomes too heavy to stand beneath son against father, reputation against friend? Trust turned into $400,000 walking out the door. I moved to the window. Outside evening was settling in the street, quiet and unchanged, while everything that mattered kept unraveling. The question, Norbert said behind me, is what we do about it. I turned to face him. I'm building a case. Former colleagues, hard evidence, but I need time. How much? Weeks, maybe a month. He nodded slowly. What do you need from me? Patience and silence. If Derek discovers what's happening, I understand, he said. He'll run or he'll destroy what you've gathered. I need him to believe everything is still holding. Norbert stood collected his keys. How long can you hold on, waiting for resolution? I asked. How long do you need? I can't give you an exact number yet. He considered me for a moment, then smiled, a genuine one this time. Harlan, I've spent 5 years waiting for you to ask me for something. A few more weeks is nothing. He moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I never doubted you, not once. Your son used your name. He just didn't understand what that name actually stood for. You're going to set this right, I know it. Then he was gone. I stood at the window watching his taillights disappear. My closest friend. 5 years of Wednesday afternoons over a chessboard. $400,000 taken because my son told him I stood behind it all. 23 investor families, most of them seniors. And now I had one name, one face, one number to put to it. Norbert Fenn, $400,000. Gone because Derek said Harlan Colby backs this company 100%. I walked back to my office and lowered myself into the desk chair. Nadine's USB drive sat beside my phone. 847 files of documented evidence. Dex's background report on Ronan Sperry. Clifford's analysis of the Ponzi scheme. Norbert's account of what was taken from him. The case was accumulating piece after piece, and so was the weight of knowing precisely who Derek had harmed and exactly how he'd used my name to do it. Clifford Baxter's face came up on Zoom at 9 a.m. Monday morning, wearing an expression I'd seen many times across the years we'd worked cases together. The look that told you things were worse than the room had estimated and that whatever clock was running had just been set to a much faster speed. We have a problem, he said. A serious one. I was at my desk, coffee, untouched Nadine's USB drive beside the laptop. Go ahead. The CFO of Colby Capital, Owen Thorne, filed an SEC whistleblower form, a TCR, 4 months ago, somewhere around May. The room seemed to tilt slightly. 4 months. Yes. And the SEC has formally escalated from informal inquiry to a full order of investigation. They now have the statutory authority to issue subpoenas and compel production of records. When did the escalation happen? 6 to 8 weeks ago. Document requests are already going out. That's the source of the pressure Derek's been feeling. Unexplained queries on public filings, mounting anxiety he can't quite trace to anything specific. He doesn't know exactly where it's coming from. 4 months. The CFO had filed 4 months ago while I was staking tomato plants and sitting across a chessboard from Norbert. The federal government had already been moving. What does that mean for our timeline? I asked. A Wells notice typically follows within 3 to 6 months of a formal investigation order. Once they issue that notice, it's a formal signal that the SEC intends to pursue civil enforcement. After that, the pace quickens dramatically. How quickly? Days, possibly weeks. They'll move to freeze assets before any judgment can be rendered. And Harlan, he paused. If that freeze lands before Nadine's divorce is filed and her claims are on record with the court, she loses everything. I rose and crossed to the window. Morning light lay across Kirby Drive. A mail truck rolled by. An ordinary Monday, while my world narrowed down to a matter of weeks. Break that down, I said. Clifford pulled up a document on screen. A Wells notice is standard procedure before civil enforcement begins. Once it's issued, the SEC typically moves without delay to freeze the defendant's assets. They file for a temporary restraining order, argue dissipation risk, and a judge usually signs off within hours. And if Nadine hasn't filed for divorce yet, her marital property claims don't yet exist in the court system. The federal asset freeze takes precedence. Everything gets locked: accounts, real estate, investments. The divorce court can't reach it because the federal action got there first. Nadine would have to wait out the SEC case, which could drag on for years. By then, whatever's left has been consumed by legal fees or handed to fraud victims through receivership. I turned from the window. So we're racing the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Yes. How much runway do we have? I can't give you a firm date. The Wells notice could fall in 3 months or 3 weeks. The SEC doesn't post timelines. But Harlan, you need to act right now. Get Nadine in front of a family law attorney today. File the divorce petition file for emergency asset protection. Get everything registered before the feds lock it all down. I thought about Nadine. 847 files. 8 months of courage. What about the evidence she'd gathered? It's gold for the divorce case. Financial records, hidden accounts, a pattern of systematic abuse. But none of it will matter if the SEC freezes everything first. The federal government has no interest in marital property disputes when it's pursuing securities fraud. They'll sweep it all up and sort it out later. 28 years hunting fraudsters for the federal government. And now I was trying to stay ahead of the same machinery I once helped run before it could inadvertently roll over my own family. There's one more thing, Clifford said. The CFO, Owen Thorne, is cooperating fully with the SEC. That means insider testimony, internal documents, everything they need to nail the Ponzi scheme. This isn't a shaky case. This is airtight. When that Wells notice drops, it's over. Does Derek know about the CFO? No sign of it, Thorne filed confidentially. The SEC shields those identities until they're ready to go public. But once the Wells notice is issued, it all becomes public record. I settled back into my chair. What happens to Derek when the notice lands? SEC civil enforcement first finds disgorgement, a lifetime ban from the securities industry. Then the DOJ reviews for criminal prosecution, wire fraud, securities fraud. We're talking federal prison, Harlan. Multiple years. I thought about my son, 40 years old father to an 8-year-old girl standing at the edge of a federal prison sentence because a career fraudster had used him. And I thought about Nadine and Cora on the verge of losing everything because the federal government's schedule had no room for a little girl who might lose her home. What happens if the SEC issues the Wells notice before we move, I asked. Asset freeze. The court locks everything down to prevent dissipation. If Nadine hasn't filed her divorce claims, first she gets nothing. No house, no settlement, no protection. Cora loses her home, and Nadine walks away with whatever scraps remain after the SEC and bankruptcy receivers collect their share. Clifford leaned toward the camera, his expression grave. Harlan, hear me. I know you respect the SEC's process. I know you built your career working alongside them, but this time you're not sitting on their side of the table. You're on the other side. And if the SEC issues that Wells notice first, the asset freeze destroys Nadine, you have to beat the feds to it. The screen went dark as Clifford ended the call. I sat alone in the quiet office. 3 to 6 months, maybe less. The Wells notice could arrive any day, and when it did, everything would freeze: Derek's assets, Nadine's claims, Cora's home, unless I moved first. Unless I could coordinate a family law, filing an SEC investigation, and a personal mission to shield my granddaughter, all before the federal government's timetable crushed everyone in its path. I picked up my phone and typed a message to Nadine. Time to find a divorce attorney today. Pastor Amos Greer looked me square in the eye across the desk in his small church office at 2:30 Monday afternoon and spoke the words that would reframe everything I thought I understood about my son's timeline. Harlan, I've been trying to tell you for months. I lowered myself into the chair across from him. Amos was 71, the Baptist pastor who had served at River Oaks Community Baptist Church for 35 years. The man who laid my wife to rest 3 years ago, the man who had held my hand at her graveside. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I've come to you several times when you looked like you were carrying something heavy, asked whether you needed to talk. Do you remember?" I did remember 3 or 4 times over those past few months. I'd assumed he was speaking to my grief over Vivian. "I thought you were talking about my grief," I said. "I was wrong." He nodded slowly. 3 months ago, June, your son came to see me. He asked how a person might persuade an aging parent to sign a power of attorney for their own protection. He wanted my help in approaching you. He said you were stubborn, that you'd need guidance from someone you trusted. I felt my chest tighten. "What did you say to him?" I refused outright. "I told him that if you needed a POA, you were perfectly capable of making that decision on your own terms, that I wouldn't be part of steering you into signing legal documents." He left angry. The office held nothing but the low hum of the air conditioning. "Why didn't you come to me then?" I asked. Amos looked down at his hands. "Because I wasn't certain it was my place to step into a family's private financial affairs. I thought perhaps I was reading too much into it, that there might be a legitimate reason. But Harlan," he looked up, "I've been watching you for months, waiting for you to come to me, and when you never did, I didn't know how to raise it without sounding like I was leveling an accusation at your son." He had gone to the man who buried my wife, the man who held my hand at her graveside, and asked him how to rob me. "I need you to be a witness," I said quietly. "Can you do that?" "Yes, whatever you need." I stood up. "Thank you, Amos, for refusing him and for telling me now." He walked me to the door. "I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. You're telling me now. That's what matters." Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, my phone rang. "Nadine, Dad. I'm sitting in a grocery store parking lot. Derek's at the office. I've only got a few minutes. What's wrong?" I got into his email account. I still had his password from before he started the surveillance. He never changed it. I found bank correspondence, a second mortgage. My grip tightened on the phone. "How much?" $380,000 executed 4 months ago, May secured against our house in Sugarland. "Did you sign it?" "No, I never saw it." He executed it alone, forged my signature, or left out the marital authorization entirely. The correspondence shows it's already in default warning status. When does it default? 73 days from now. If it defaults, the bank forecloses. Cora loses her home. I closed my eyes. Derek had mortgaged his daughter's security, the house where an 8-year-old girl slept, believing her world was solid, and he'd done it 4 months ago. The same month the CFO filed the SEC whistleblower complaint, the same month everything began to fall apart. "Is the loan fraudulent?" Nadine asked. "Yes. Texas law requires spousal authorization for loans secured by marital property. If he forged your signature or bypassed that requirement, the loan is voidable. But we have to move fast." "How fast?" "I'll call you back in an hour." 73 days until Cora loses her home. I hung up and immediately dialed Clifford. He picked up on the first ring. "What's wrong?" "Derek executed a fraudulent second mortgage against the family home. $380,000 4 months ago. It defaults in 73 days. If it defaults, Cora gets evicted." Clifford was silent for a moment. "Jesus. Harlan, can we void it? If it's genuinely fraudulent, if he forged Nadine's signature or executed it without proper authorization?" "Yes. Texas marital property law is unambiguous, but you need a lawyer today and you need to file immediately to stop the foreclosure." I looked out the window at the roses Vivian had planted. The September sun was bright. A normal day in River Oaks while my granddaughter's home hung in the balance. "Clifford," I said slowly, "let me put it all on the table. A $3.2 million Ponzi scheme targeting 23 senior families. A $380,000 fraudulent mortgage threatening an 8-year-old's home. An SEC Wells notice that could arrive any day. Nadine needs to file for divorce before the asset freeze, and I need to protect everyone. Nadine, Cora, Norbert. Every last one of those investors. Yes. 6 weeks, that's what I needed to build the case and shield everyone." "Was there time?" The line went quiet. I held the phone and waited. When Clifford finally spoke, his voice had dropped. "We don't have a choice. But Harlan, not a single day can go to waste." I set down the phone and stared at the desk. 6 weeks. 42 days. Take apart a Ponzi scheme. Kill a fraudulent mortgage. Stand between 23 families and catastrophe. Pull Nadine back from total financial devastation. Make sure Cora kept her home. Get ahead of the SEC before that Wells notice landed, and accomplish every bit of it while my son still had no idea the walls were closing in. I flipped open a blue legal pad and put pen to paper. Item 1. Get Nadine a family law attorney today. Emergency petition to void the mortgage initiate divorce. Item 2. Tear through all 847 of Nadine's files with a forensic eye. Every transaction, every account he'd tried to bury every thread. Item 3. Stay in lockstep with Clifford on the SEC clock. Nail down what window we actually had before the Wells notice arrived. Item 4. Record everything. Construct a case solid enough to survive family court, bankruptcy court, and federal enforcement running simultaneously. I read back what I'd written. 6 weeks, 42 days, beginning right now. At 2 p.m. Tuesday afternoon, I swept the desk clean spread. Nadine's evidence files out in date order, pulled 4 colored pens from the drawer, and went to work the deepest forensic dive I'd attempted in 4 years. Only this time, the man I was hunting was my own son. 1 color for money coming in, another for transfers going out, a third for the shell company Webb. I started at the beginning and worked forward without rushing. On the whiteboard behind me, a timeline ran from January 2021 to the present. Each transaction got its mark. Each pattern got its note. A mug of coffee went cold beside me untouched. Somewhere around hour 3, I saw what I was looking at. The architecture was intricate, but it belonged to another era. Derek had engineered his shell accounts around the specific detection methods that IRSCI investigators like me relied on back in the 1990s and early 2000s. Avoid paper trails. Push transfers through layer after layer of entities, keep individual deposits just under the threshold that triggered a report. The problem was those thresholds had been dead since 2009. Every technique I once used to pursue money laundering had given way to digital forensics capable of catching patterns that would have been impossible to spot in my day. So where had Derek picked all this up? Then it came back to me. Sunday dinners 3 years back before Vivian was gone. Derek would settle in and ask me to walk through the old cases. "How did you catch them, Dad?" "Where did they slip up?" I'd answered gladly. A father proud of his work, talking shop with a son who leaned in and listened like it mattered. Every one of those evenings, I believed I was passing down a respect for what the law demanded. What I was actually passing down was a manual for defeating it. He hadn't just listened, he'd taken notes. Somewhere in his mind, he'd cataloged every move I described and reverse-engineered it into cover. Everything I knew up through 2018 when I retired, he absorbed it. The old playbook front to back. I pushed back from the desk and looked at the whiteboard. My son had convinced himself he was a ghost, that no one could find him because his teacher had been the best. What he'd missed was that his teacher had been retired for years. He'd learned to vanish from 1994, not from 2022. I kept going. Around 7:30 p.m. it surfaced. File number 412 deep in Nadine's 8th month of records. Automated recurring transfers threading between 3 shell LLCs. The individual amounts were modest, $15,000 in one place, $20,000 somewhere else, scattered across enough different dates to look unrelated. In my active years, tying those transfers together would have meant weeks of manually comparing statements across separate institutions, and that was assuming anyone got lucky enough to notice the thread at all. Current forensic software doesn't give fraud a running start. The algorithms are built to find exactly this recurring movement between connected entities, regardless of how cleverly the timing or amounts are varied. Derek had shaped his entire operation around the assumption that my old methods were the benchmark. He never considered they'd been retired along with me. Each transfer was modest enough to slip under the old wire. Each transfer was substantial enough that today's tools would light it up immediately. And taken together, every one of them traced a clean, unbroken digital line that read as a single word. Ponzi. What does it do to a man finding out his son had made a study of him not to walk the same road but to disappear from his father's view entirely? I sat back, eyes on the screen, and let it settle. Derek believed he'd outthought me. He hadn't. Not because I'm cleverer, but because what he'd learned only covered about 70% of what I once knew. I'd spent 4 years on the outside watching the field move past me, recognizing tools and methods that had made everything I'd mastered look primitive. My son had stopped the clock in his head somewhere around 2002 and assumed the rest of the world had too. It hadn't. I kept scrolling through file 412, and then there they were. The names. All 23 families who had handed Derek Colby their retirement savings, each entry showing the amount and the date. Norbert Fenn, $400,000. Investment date March 2022. Robert and Patricia Hoffman, $290,000. Investment date January 2022. Eleanor Vance, $175,000. Investment date April 2022. On it went. 23 names, 23 figures, almost all of them seniors. Nearly every one of them had committed everything they had built on a single belief that Harlan Colby's son ran an honest operation. I sent it to the printer and set the pages on the desk in front of me. 23 households people whose faces I might well recognize. Neighbors who kept up with chess nights at the community center, sat in pews on Sunday mornings, tended their yards in River Oaks. People who had extended trust to the Colby name because of what that name had always signified. People my son had taken apart. I turned back to the monitor and file 412. Everything Derek thought was buried was right there. A digital record he'd been certain no one could follow, now sitting completely exposed. The recurring transfers announced the Ponzi structure as plainly as a signed confession, modest enough that an investigator from my era wouldn't have blinked, conspicuous enough that any modern algorithm would have flagged it before lunch. And within this file sat everything I needed, not just to establish that a fraud had occurred, but to put a name to every victim, a number to every loss, and erect a case solid enough to stand in family court, in bankruptcy court, and in front of federal enforcement all at once. I saved it, made 3 separate backups, and forwarded a copy to Clifford with one line of text. Found it. File 412, complete victim list included. Then I sat with the whiteboard dates, money flows, shell structures, the whole skeleton of what my son had built, all of it rendered in my own handwriting. At 8 p.m., the last of the light left the window. Derek had taken in 70% of what I knew, enough to feel certain he was beyond reach, not enough to actually be so. The gap was obvious now. The evidence was merciless. Inside file 412, 23 names, 23 amounts, 23 homes where older people were quietly puzzling over why their accounts weren't doing what Derek Colby had promised them they would do. I picked up my phone and sent Nadine a text. Found it. Attorney tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I'll pick you up. The reply was almost instant. Thank you, Dad. I hit the light switch and made my way to the kitchen. 6 weeks to bring this whole structure down. 42 days. But the map was in my hands now. File 412 held it all: the fraudulent mortgage, the Ponzi operation, the names of every victim, the evidence that couldn't be explained away. My son believed he'd made himself invisible. He was wrong. Come morning, the dismantling would begin. Celeste. Dunmore set her reading glasses on the table at 9 a.m. Wednesday morning, looked across her 15th floor Midtown Houston conference table at everything Nadine and I had laid out and said the words we'd needed to hear. You have a case, and it's stronger than most, I see. Celeste was 58, a family law partner whose career spanned 3 decades of divorce litigation and asset fraud. She'd given the last 2 hours to a thorough review, Nadine's full digital archive. My forensic breakdown with file 412 marked up throughout the assisted living facility email chain, the unsigned power of attorney, and the fraudulent mortgage statement for $380,000. She lifted the mortgage page from the stack. Under Texas marital property law, this document is void. Your husband took out a loan against the family home without your knowledge or authorization. It cannot be enforced. Nadine leaned in. What happens now? It means I will issue an immediate formal subpoena to the lending institution within the framework of the divorce action to compel their compliance. This is standard discovery, nothing extraordinary. We don't need anyone going public. We serve the subpoena, the bank falls in line, or it answers for contempt. The loan ceases to exist. I watched Nadine's expression. Something that had been locked tight in her face for months was beginning to come loose. How quickly can this happen? She asked. The divorce petition and the subpoena, I can have both filed by Friday. The bank gets 10 days to respond. Cora's home is under legal protection within 2 weeks. Celeste looked over at me. As for you, the power of attorney, attempt the correspondence about the assisted living placement, the pattern of cutting her off. All of it is usable. Financial elder abuse carries criminal exposure in Texas, but beyond that it documents a sustained campaign of coercive control that makes Nadine's case considerably stronger. You have more options here, she said, than you may realize. Nadine smiled, a real one, the first since we'd walked in. I watched my daughter-in-law start to believe that escape was actually possible. What I was about to uncover that night, What was sitting right there waiting in the dark would change the shape of everything I thought I knew about my own son. Before I tell you what it meant, I want to ask you, if someone close to you had been quietly working against you, would you move fast and confront them, or take your time and build an airtight case first? Relief isn't the same as victory. It's just the moment you realize you're allowed to fight back. Wednesday evening at 9:45 p.m., I opened the iCloud family sharing folder out of my usual weekly habit. I like seeing new pictures of Cora's school activities, drawings, that gap-toothed grin. Under her profile, a new file had appeared in the voice memos folder. 23 minutes and 14 seconds, recorded 3 days prior. I stopped. Cora was 8 years old. She barely navigated most of the iPad apps. I downloaded the file and put in my headphones. By 11 p.m., I was sitting alone in my unlit kitchen, listening. Cora had opened the voice memos app almost certainly by accident and left the iPad sitting on the desk in Derek's home office. He hadn't bothered to lock the door. She'd gone out to play. The device had synced automatically to the shared cloud without her having any idea what that meant. 23 minutes of my son on the phone, speaking without any caution, talking to what sounded from context like his Florida partner. Derek's voice came through clearly around the 7-minute mark. The old man will sign it. He doesn't know a damn thing. Once I have that POA, we can move the capital within 48 hours. An 8-year-old left her iPad on a desk, and in doing so, she captured the kind of truth her grandfather had spent 40 years learning to uncover. The most damning evidence sometimes comes carried by the most innocent hands. I sat through the entire recording, every word, every dismissive remark about his wife, every calculation about reaching my assets, every contingency for staying one step ahead of detection. When it was over, I set the iPad down on the table and looked out at the dark. "Oh, sweetheart," I said to nobody, "look at our boy." And for the first time in years since Vivian's funeral, I broke. Not quiet tears, real weeping. The kind that crawls up from somewhere cracked and deep. My son. My only child, the boy I'd raised, the man I'd spent years teaching to stand on the right side of the law, talking about me like I was a problem to be managed, a target to be worked, something to use and walk away from. I sat in that dark kitchen until 1 a.m, not moving, staring at the wall. The recording was inadmissible, captured accidentally by a minor, no consent, synced through a consumer cloud service. No judge would touch it. But it was a perfect map. Every confidence Derek had shared, every scheme he'd outlined, every seam in his operation. It told me exactly where to dig. Thursday morning at 5:30 a.m., I was already standing among the rose bushes. I'd been out there since 4, too restless for sleep. The morning dew had soaked through my shoes completely. I called Clifford. He picked up right away. "Harlan, it's 5:30 in the morning. "I need to tell you something," I said. The line went quiet. About 4 months ago in May, I picked up anomalies in the way Derek talked about his fund's capital structure. Small things, phrases that didn't quite add up. Any agent still on the job would have opened an audit right then. "But you didn't press it," Clifford said softly. "No." I quietly retained legal counsel. I established an irrevocable trust around my own assets as a defensive measure. But I kept telling myself I was misreading things, that I was wrong about my own son. The garden held nothing but bird song starting up in the pre-dawn quiet. "Clifford, the real regret isn't that I had suspicions. It's that I spent 4 months holding out for evidence that I was mistaken. Nadine went through 4 months of hell because I sat on my hands, because I needed to believe my son was better than what the evidence was telling me." Clifford waited until I was done. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "For what it's worth, you're human. Any father would have done the same." "Maybe. But that ends today." My voice settled into something firm. "Not one more day of waiting. What do you need?" "A synchronized operation. Legal, federal, personal protection, all of it moving in concert. 6 weeks to take apart what he built. Done correctly. No shortcuts, no score settling, just justice. I'll get the attorney on a call this afternoon. We'll draw up the full plan." "Thank you." I hung up and stood watching the sun clear the rooftops over the River Oaks garden. The same roses Vivian and I had put in the ground 4 years ago. The same garden where this had all begun with a phone call on a Friday evening. The defensive chapter was finished. I'd given 4 months to the hope that my son would prove me wrong. I knew better now. I had evidence. I had allies. I had a legal strategy and a 6-week window to execute it, and I was done being a frightened father. I became again what 28 years of training had made me, a federal investigator tracking a criminal who happened to share my name. The hesitation was over. The three-way secure video call linked up at 9 a.m. Thursday morning. Me at my home office in River Oaks, Clifford Baxter from his DOJ consulting space, Celeste Dunmore from her Midtown Houston law firm. For the first time since all of this started, we weren't scrambling to catch up to Derek's moves. We were setting the terms ourselves. I looked at both faces on the screen and put the central question on the table. 6 weeks, 42 days. Can we execute this? Celeste answered without hesitation. If every step is precise and we don't lose a single day. Clifford pulled up a document. Let me lay out the operational phases. I reached for a notepad and started writing. Weeks 1 and 2. Clifford spoke first. We finalized the forensic accounting trail using your file 412 work. Celeste files the bank subpoena for the fraudulent mortgage inside the sealed divorce action. We submit the divorce complaint under seal to protect the element of surprise. And I open secure contact with the CFO Owen Thorne through DOJ channels to lock in formal cooperation. Weeks 3 and 4. Celeste took it from there. You sit down with Derek. Texas is a one-party consent state for recordings. You get him talking and you capture everything legally. No violations. Nothing that gives a defense attorney a foothold. Weeks 5 and 6. Clifford brought it home. Derek has a 10th anniversary gala already on the books for Colby Capital. It's on the calendar, can't be quietly canceled. We serve divorce papers and SEC Wells notice simultaneously in front of 150 guests. Public exposure. Nowhere to go. I leaned back in my chair. The recording from Cora, is there any path to getting it before a court? Celeste shook her head. No. Inadmissible. Accidental capture by a minor, no consent, no knowledge of what was happening. No judge would allow it. But Clifford added it functions as an exact roadmap. Every conversation Derek had on tape, every plan he laid out. We know the right questions to ask the transactions to focus on the associates to squeeze. An 8-year-old's accidental recording, legally worthless as evidence, strategically invaluable as a guide to her father's crimes. I studied the operational timeline on my screen. 6 weeks divided into phases. Every phase built around clear protocols and fallback contingencies. What about the CFO, I asked. Can we count on him? That's what I need to determine, Clifford said. I'm meeting him this Saturday, neutral ground private attorney present. If he means what he says, he'll bring internal transaction ledgers that Nadine's files couldn't reach. And if he's bluffing, we go forward without him. But Harlan Clifford leaned toward the camera. If the CFO delivers what he claims to have, this case moves from strong to airtight. Internal ledgers tracing exactly how Derek shuffled funds between investor accounts. That's the piece that closes every door. Celeste spoke up. One more thing, the divorce filing. I'm keeping it under seal. Derek won't know a thing until we're ready to hand him papers. No warning, no window to shift assets or erase records. How long can we hold the seal, I asked. Until the moment of service. Standard procedure when asset concealment and abuse allegations are involved. Courts recognize the need for tactical surprise. I nodded. Every phase has contingencies. Every phase. Clifford confirmed it. If Derek gets wind of the investigation ahead of schedule, we have fallback positions ready. If the SEC accelerates its timeline, we have protocols for that. If the CFO goes cold, we have other evidence routes. The call wrapped up at 10:30 a.m. I sat at my desk looking at my notes. 6 weeks, 42 days, from reactive defense to coordinated offense. Saturday afternoon, Clifford called from his car. Just came from the CFO, he said. How did it go? The man is scared. Sat himself in the back corner of a diner 30 miles outside Houston watching every entrance and exit. But he's committed. Owen Thorne was 34 CFO of Colby Capital Partners, the man who had filed the SEC whistleblower form 4 months earlier. According to Clifford, he'd been watching Derek's fraud develop for more than a year, building his own documentation, waiting for the moment to step forward. He filed the SEC form TCR 4 months ago, Clifford went on. But he's still sitting on internal transaction ledgers that no public clearinghouse can access, proprietary accounting systems, shadow books that lay out exactly how Derek moved money between investor accounts. What's his ask? A formal non-prosecution cooperation framework. Full immunity in exchange for handing over the unredacted digital records. His private attorney was there throughout. Everything is on the record. I turned that over in my mind. Did you record the meeting? With his express consent, his attorney signed off. Everything is on tape, so he's the leverage we've been missing. Yes. The CFO holds the data that Nadine's 847 files could never reach. He knows where every dollar went, every fabricated return, every transaction that never should have existed. I turned toward the afternoon light coming through the office window. He wants to sit across from me, doesn't he? Clifford paused. How did you know? Because he needs to look me in the eye. He wants to read whether the father was part of it or was just another victim. He has to know which side I'm standing on. You're right. He asked about you specifically. The CFO was the inside witness. The forensic files were the ammunition. I was the trigger. But Clifford understood you don't reveal the trigger until the moment you need to pull it. What did you tell him? I asked. Clifford's voice didn't waver. No, not yet. Hold that card for the final play. The logic was clear to me immediately. The instant Owen Thorne and I were in the same room, Derek's defense attorneys would start screaming conspiracy and witness tampering. They'd claim we'd aligned our stories, that the whole investigation was a vendetta run by a bitter father out for blood. So I stay back. For now, I'm simply a concerned father gathering evidence to protect his daughter-in-law. A retired agent who reviewed financial records out of personal concern. Nothing improper, nothing that puts the case at risk. You're right, I said. Keep me separate from him until the gala. No direct contact, nothing that could be held up and questioned. Exactly. When those papers get served in front of 150 witnesses, you step forward as an independent party, a father protecting his family, not a co-conspirator who helped construct a federal case. Understood. Harlan Clifford said quietly, we're building something that has to hold up everywhere. Family court, bankruptcy court, federal enforcement, and that only happens if every piece is clean. No shortcuts, I said. No shortcuts. The call ended. The afternoon light crossed the floor slowly as I sat there. 6 weeks. The CFO wants to meet me. The divorce is sealed and filed. The forensic evidence is in order. The timeline is set. And I stay out of sight until everything converges. A concerned father. Nothing beyond that, not until the gala. Celeste Dunmore's text landed at 6:47 a.m. Tuesday morning. Subpoena results in. Call me now. I was already up, sitting at the kitchen table with cold coffee in front of me. I called. She answered before the second ring. The signature on the spousal consent form doesn't match Nadine's exemplars, not even close. I shut my eyes. How bad is it? Bad enough that it's obviously forged, the pen pressure is wrong, the letter formation is wrong. A handwriting expert could make this case in 30 seconds. Harlan, your son got sloppy. What does that give us? It means the $380,000 second mortgage is void under Texas marital property law. He executed a loan against marital property without valid spousal authorization. I'm filing an emergency motion to freeze the property title this morning. Timeline. The court will issue a TTRO within 48 hours. Cora's home will be legally untouchable. The bank cannot foreclose. Derek cannot sell. It's frozen. I thought of Cora's room, the stuffed elephant on her bed, the finger paintings taped to the wall, and felt something ease in my chest for the first time in weeks. Can he fight the TTRO, I ask. He can try. But perjury on a mortgage instrument is a felony. If he mounts a challenge, we force depositions. He'd have to take an oath and explain that signature. No attorney worth his fee lets a client walk into that. So Cora is safe. Cora is safe. Celeste confirms it. I hang up and sit at the kitchen table as daylight comes up over River Oaks. One piece secured. One 8-year-old girl who will keep her home. Derek's desperation made him careless, and that carelessness just protected his own daughter. Wednesday evening, the core team gathers in the basement committee room of River Oaks Community Baptist Church, Neutral Ground, arranged by Reverend Amos Greer, the same man who stood at Vivian's graveside 3 years ago. The room is spare, folding table, metal chairs, fluorescent lights humming overhead. Celeste sits at one end, briefcase open, Nadine beside her. I sit across from them. Clifford joins by secure video call on Celeste's laptop. Celeste fans documents across the table, bank subpoena results, the TTRO, the sealed divorce filing file 412, the 6-week operational timeline, and a floor plan. Nadine looks at me. Her eyes are red, but her voice doesn't waver. Dad, are you standing with me? I hold her gaze for a moment. No act, I say. I am standing with what is right. She smiles. A real one for the first time since we sat down. Because I'm not doing this for revenge, she says. I'm doing this for Cora. That's exactly why I'm here. Celeste walks through the final 4 weeks. Harlan meets Derek and records the conversation under Texas one-party consent law, draws him into talking about the power of attorney and the fund structure. Then, the execution, Derek's 10th anniversary gala, November 8th, Post Oak Hotel Ballroom, 200 guests, divorce papers served at 8:15 right after his opening remarks, SEC Wells notice served simultaneously. Public. Irreversible. No backroom settlement. Celeste says no sealed proceedings, public exposure in front of every investor he defrauded. Reverend Greer, sitting quietly in the corner, speaks for the first time. This is about protecting Cora. Yes, I say. Then I'll pray for all of you, he says, and for Derek, because what you're about to do will destroy him. He destroyed himself, Nadine says quietly. We're just making sure everyone knows it. Everyone leaves at 9. I sit alone in the church basement studying the floor plan Celeste left on the table. Stage here. Investor tables arranged in a semicircle. Exit routes marked in red. 200 witnesses. 1 microphone. I trace the route from the entrance to the podium with one finger. Calculate the sight lines. Think through the timing. Picture my son standing on that stage, certain he's won. He has no idea what's coming. I look at the floor plan one last time, then I say one word aloud to the empty room. Good. The call came Monday morning at 9:47 a.m., earlier than Derek's usual rhythm. I let it ring twice. Dad. Not his standard smooth opener. Something underneath the casual tone was drawn tight like a wire under strain. How are you feeling, fine, son? The usual complaints. Good. A pause. I could hear him breathing, measuring. Listen, I need to stop by this weekend, Saturday afternoon around 2. There's some insurance paperwork we should get squared away. Beneficiary updates. Nothing pressing, but these things have a way of piling up. Insurance paperwork. 4 weeks after the durable power of attorney. I let the silence hang just long enough. Of course, son. I've been looking forward to seeing you. Great. Won't take long. He was off the line before I could say anything else. No mention of Cora, no question about Nadine. The conversation had the clipped efficiency of a man working down a checklist. I sat in my kitchen with the phone still warm in my hand, morning light lying flat across the counter. Derek had always had a feel for pressure, knowing when the balance in a room was shifting, when to push and when to pull back. He could sense the walls tightening even without seeing who was moving them. The TTRO on the mortgage had been filed under seal, but banks talk. The SEC's broadened inquiry would have sent Ripple's calls that went unreturned meetings where the tone changed. He was coming to collect another signature before whatever he sensed became something he couldn't outrun. I texted Clifford. He called Saturday 2 p.m. asking to come by for an insurance paperwork signature. The reply came back in under a minute. Perfect. I'll be there Friday night. The human brain processes fear through pattern recognition. I learned that in my first month at IRSCI. When someone lies, the body gives it away. Micro-expressions, jaw tension, speech patterns that drift from baseline. But interrogation isn't really about catching lies. It's about building conditions where the truth becomes the path of least resistance, where the subject talks himself into corners he never saw approaching. Over my career, I had run formal interrogations in 43 cases. I knew exactly how long silence could stretch before it turned into pressure, which questions produced defensiveness, versus the ones that drew someone out how to hold a person's own words up like a mirror. Derek had sat across from me at Sunday dinners for 40 years absorbing my habits, but he had never once watched me work. Clifford arrived Friday at 8:30 p.m. with a leather briefcase. He set it on the dining table and opened it with deliberate care. Inside a device smaller than a deck of cards, matte black professional-grade federal standard. Texas is a one-party consent state, Clifford said. You're legally clear to record any conversation you're part of. The file uploads to encrypted cloud storage in real time. Even if he finds it and destroys it, the recording survives. He showed me the placement shirt pocket microphone positioned to capture everything within 12 feet. Then he pulled out a blue legal pad, dense with precise handwriting. Walk me through the interrogation. We worked for 3 hours. Clifford played Derek defensive at first, then dismissive, then coldly calculating when pressed. I rehearsed questions that sounded like fatherly concern but were engineered as traps. I've been worried about you, son. The SEC inquiry, is that going to affect your investors? Guiding him to acknowledge that the investigation existed, that client funds were at risk. This mortgage on my house, the one I never signed, do you know anything about that? Pressing him to either admit the truth or lock himself into a lie we could demolish. The whole approach depended on letting him talk. Derek's confidence had always been his greatest strength and his most exploitable flaw. When he felt he had the upper hand, he over-explained volunteered details nobody had asked for, built justifications that gave away more than they covered. What if he sees what you're doing? Clifford asked at 11:40 p.m. What if he shuts down? I thought about Norbert Fenn standing in my living room. My dad backs me 100%. I thought about Nadine's 8 months of surveillance files. I thought about Cora's recording, inadmissible but devastating in what it revealed. The old man will sign it. He won't stop, I said. He thinks I'm the mark. He'll keep going because he's convinced he's the sharper man in the room. Clifford studied me across the table. And if he hedges, if he circles around any direct admission, I held his gaze. 43 cases. 43 targets who thought they could talk circles around a federal agent. 43 recordings that ended in confessions their lawyers spent years fighting to keep out of evidence. Clifford, I said quietly, I've run 40 of those interrogations. I know how to walk him to the line. He nodded slowly. Then he reached into his briefcase and set a second device on the table identical to the first. Backup, he said, in case he asks you to empty your pockets. I looked at the 2 recorders on my dining table. Tomorrow afternoon my son would step through my front door expecting to leave with another signature. Instead he'd spend an hour talking to his father and every syllable would be preserved. Clifford left at midnight. At the door he stopped and turned back. Harlan, once tomorrow happens, there's no reversing it. The moment he incriminates himself on tape, this is no longer an investigation. It becomes evidence for prosecution. I know. Are you ready for what that means? I thought about the 23 families whose retirement savings had vanished. About Nadine monitored and hemmed in for 8 months. About Cora, whose home had been mortgaged without anyone asking her father's permission. About the place where love and justice part ways and what a man does when he cannot hold both. Yes, I said. I'm ready. After Clifford left, I sat alone in the dark living room. The recorders were upstairs on charge. The house held its familiar sounds, the heating system cycling the floor joists, settling the faint hum of the refrigerator. In 14 hours, Derek would arrive. My phone buzzed at 12:47 a.m. A text from Celeste Dunmore, my attorney. SEC Wells notice was issued today. He'll receive it Monday. Whatever you're doing tomorrow, do it now or it won't matter. I read the message 3 times. Derek had no idea the notice had been issued. He was coming tomorrow to lock down my insurance beneficiaries, still believing he could manage the mounting pressure if he moved quickly enough, but the federal machinery was already running. By Monday morning, he'd know the SEC was moving toward enforcement. By Tuesday, his attorneys would instruct him to stop talking to everyone about everything. Tomorrow was the last opening, the final window to get him on record before he went silent. I typed back, understood, I'll handle it. Then I shut off the phone and sat in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, counting down the hours. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m. Saturday afternoon. I drew one breath, pressed record on the micro recorder in my breast pocket, and opened the door to my son. Derek stood on the porch in pressed gray trousers and a charcoal blazer leather portfolio under one arm. His handshake was firm, but his palm was damp. Hey, Dad. Thanks for making time. Of course. I made coffee. I led him to the living room. The afternoon light came through the windows at a low, sharp angle. I'd set my chair so the recorder would pick up everything clearly. Clifford had run an acoustics check the night before. How's Cora doing in school? I asked, pouring coffee. My hands were steady. She texted me a photo of her science project last week about the water cycle. Derek took the cup, but didn't drink. She's fine. Busy with school stuff. He set the portfolio on the coffee table. Listen, Dad. I know you're not one for paperwork, but this matters. Insurance beneficiary updates. We need to get everything structured correctly. He opened the portfolio. The document inside had the unmistakable shape of a formal legal instrument. Multiple pages, signature blocks, witness lines. This was not insurance paperwork. This was a durable power of attorney. I drew it toward me, squinting as though the small print was giving me trouble. Walk me through it, son. What exactly does this accomplish? It protects your assets. Derek leaned in, voice smooth and practiced. With the divorce proceedings underway, Nadine's attorneys are going to reach for everything they can touch. If your assets move temporarily into my control, they're shielded from any claims. I nodded slowly as though working through something complicated. So this POA, it protects my assets from what exactly? From Nadine, from her lawyers, from anyone looking to destabilize the family. He gestured at the document. It's temporary just until things settle, then everything transfers back. I let the silence sit, counted to 5. Then I asked the question Clifford and I had rehearsed. And the investors, the ones you manage at Colby Capital, they won't have any claim. Derek's expression shifted barely just a flicker before the smooth surface came back. The investors are taken care of. Trust me. I was nodding like a confused old man, but internally I was cataloging it: conspiracy to defraud, wire fraud, fiduciary breach. And now on tape, his direct statement that the asset transfers would protect funds from investor claims, and acknowledgement that the fraud existed, confirmation of intent to conceal. Every word was going to the device in my breast pocket, uploading in real time to encrypted cloud storage. Even if he found it and smashed it on the way out, the evidence was already beyond his reach. He kept talking, explaining how temporary transfers work, how the family needs to stay united, how this was best for everyone, especially Cora. Each sentence added another layer to what was now a recorded confession. I had run 40 interrogations over my career. I knew exactly when silence was more useful than a question. Derek's confidence was doing the work for me. "Let me ask you something," I said, setting down my cup. "This transfer, how long would you need control? 6 months, maybe a year? Just until the SEC inquiry wraps up and the divorce is finalized." There it was. Explicit acknowledgement of the SEC investigation captured on tape. "I see." I picked up the document again, leafed through it slowly, then set it down. "I'd like my attorney to look this over before I sign anything." "No." The word came out hard and fast. Derek's entire bearing changed, the smooth pitch gone in an instant. "Dad, there's no time for attorneys. This has to be signed today. I just think it would be prudent to, if you're not going to cooperate, you're not seeing your granddaughter anymore." His voice was flat, clinical. "You're not fit to be around an impressionable child when you're the one tearing this family apart." I looked at my son, truly looked at him. The man across from me had Cora's eyes and Vivian's smile. I'd taught him to ride a bike on this very street, sat with him at the dining table, working through calculus, watched him graduate summa cum laude and build what looked like a successful firm. And now he was using my granddaughter as a lever to force my signature over assets he needed to conceal a fraud. The moment he brought Cora into it, something in my chest went cold and went quiet. This wasn't my son anymore. This was a target, a subject demonstrating consciousness of guilt, engaging in elder abuse and familial coercion. The recorder was getting every word. I held his gaze. For the first time in that conversation, I let the mask drop slightly. Just 3 seconds. Long enough for him to see past the confused old man act to catch a glimpse of the federal agent who'd spent 30 years dismantling financial criminals. Then I let it settle back into place. "I see," I said quietly. "Let me think about it." "Go home, son." Derek stared at me, trying to read what had just moved behind my eyes. Then he stood, collected his portfolio, and walked to the door. I followed him out without a word. His Mercedes pulled away down the oak-lined street at 3:18 p.m. I went back inside, closed the door, and turned the lock. I drew the recorder from my breast pocket. The red light was still going. 18 minutes, 23 seconds, every word intact. I called Clifford. He answered on the first ring. "It's done," I said. "Every word. Explicit asset transfers to shield from investor claims. Acknowledged the SEC investigation. Threatened to cut off Cora access when I asked for attorney review." I sat down, suddenly spent. Conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. All on tape. Clifford was quiet for a moment. "Texas one-party consent. It's all admissible." "This is it." "Yes, I'll reach out to Celeste. We'll have this with the SEC by Monday morning." He paused. "How are you?" I looked at the coffee cup still sitting on the table. The portfolio Derek had left behind in his hurry to go. "I'm fine. Forward me the extraction protocol. 3 copies Celeste gets. 1 the SEC gets, 1 we keep, 1. Already on it." The call ended and I sat there alone, turning over in my palm a device no bigger than a cigarette lighter that held everything my son had said. 14 days to the gala. 2 weeks before 200 people watched the whole thing come apart. Derek had walked away from that conversation believing he'd bent an old man to his will. He had no idea he'd just signed his own indictment. The phone went off at 2 a.m., splitting the silence. I didn't need to check the caller ID. Only one person rings at that hour, and only when something has gone badly wrong. 4th ring. "Yes, Dad." Gone was every ounce of that polished self-assurance. Stripped bare, shaking. "Dad, I need the money right now. I'm in catastrophic trouble. Ronan's gone. He liquidated everything and ran." I pushed myself upright and clicked on the bedside lamp. Sunday, 2:03 a.m. 12 hours since I'd sat across from Derek in my own living room and captured every word. "What do you mean, gone?" "Fled. $200,000 out of the operating account wiped clean. Number disconnected." The words tumbled out of him in a rush. "Dad, I need cash now. Whatever you can move, 50,000, 100,000, I have to cover client redemptions by Monday morning or the whole thing folds." I sat there listening to my son plead for funds to keep stealing from people. The recording device from earlier that day was sitting right there on my nightstand. 18 minutes of his own voice condemning him. "Dad, are you there? Did you hear me? I need—" "Go to sleep, son," I said, quietly. "We'll sort it out in the morning." I set the phone down at 2:17 a.m. and slept without interruption. Clifford reached me at first light. DOJ had Ronan, George Bush Intercontinental Airport CBP detention, Florida probation violation. I was already in the kitchen dressed coffee brewing. Outside the window, the November air was cold and bright. Ronan's federal lookout notice had gone in Friday's Standard once the SEC moves to a Wells notice. He'd shown up at the gate trying to catch a midnight flight to Grand Cayman. Customs pulled him before he reached the jetway. Clifford delivered it all in that flat, composed way of his. The 2018 securities fraud conviction had attached 3 years of probation. The moment he crossed out of Florida jurisdiction, he was done. He isn't going anywhere. I carried my cup to the window and watched the steam curl in the cold light. Derek's partner had stripped what he could and bolted for somewhere that wouldn't send him back. The machinery, though, had been ready and waiting, and Derek Clifford asked. He rang me 2 same-story needed money to keep Monday from collapsing. "What did you say to him?" Told him to go to sleep. A beat of silence. "Then the gala's tomorrow night. Final meeting this evening. Church basement, 7 o'clock. Everybody needs to show. I'll be there." I passed Sunday morning out back, staking the tomato plants in my backyard. Something about working with my hands steadied the mind while the hours ticked down. Tomorrow night, the whole truth would surface. Around noon, Cora sent me a photo of her science project about the water cycle. I sent back a heart and told her I loved her. I didn't write what I was actually thinking, that by this time tomorrow her father's entire world would be rubble. The church basement looked the same as it had every Sunday night for the past 4 weeks. Fluorescent tubes buzzing overhead, folding chairs pulled into a circle, the coffee maker working in the corner. Tonight, though, the air carried a different weight. This was the last time. Nadine came through the door, first drawn and hollow-eyed, but set in her purpose. Celeste followed with the leather briefcase. Clifford walked in at exactly 7, a file box tucked under one arm. Reverend Amos Greer held the door for each of us with the same quiet warmth he'd give a Sunday congregation, not 6 people planning to dismantle a fraud. Owen Thorne, 34, the CFO who had put the SEC whistleblower complaint in motion 4 months back, was the last to arrive. He looked thinner than the photograph in Clifford's files, pale, worn down, but the grip when we shook hands was solid. "I told him what you did when you filed that TCR. That's what set this whole thing in motion." Owen gave a short nod. I couldn't keep standing by while he destroyed people. We took our seats. Celeste unclasped the briefcase and laid a document on the iron patio table, thick pages bound in blue backing. The divorce complaint and asset inventory. 47 pages laying out systematic financial abuse, fraudulent transfers, and marital misconduct in full. I'll hand it to him myself tomorrow night at 8:15, right after Derek finishes his opening remarks. Clean service. She pushed it across to Nadine, who sat very still, just looking at the cover without touching it. Clifford worked through his file box. The forensic packet Owen had built together with Harlan's analysis landed at the SEC on Friday. They've issued the Wells notice. Formal enforcement action is underway. One of their attorneys will be in that ballroom tomorrow to make personal service at 8:20. No arrest, no cuffs. Just the kind of legal ruin that follows a man the rest of his life. The recording Celeste asked eyes on me. I pressed my hand to the outside of my jacket. That USB drive hadn't left my pocket in 2 days. 18 minutes, an explicit admission of transferring assets to put them beyond investors' reach, acknowledgement that he knew the SEC was closing in, and a direct threat to block my access to my granddaughter when I mentioned getting a lawyer involved. Conspiracy, fraud, elder abuse, all of it sitting right there under Georgia law. Nobody spoke. Clifford turned to Owen. "You'll bring the final hard drives to the venue tomorrow night. Yes, the internal ledgers, the complete Ponzi structure laid bare, every return that was invented, every statement that was fabricated, every dollar that moved through a shell." Owen's voice didn't waver. "Everything a criminal referral requires." Reverend Greer lowered his head. In that still basement, I could almost sense what was coming, the particular sound a constructed thing makes when it finally gives way. When he raised his eyes again, "This is justice, not revenge. Carry that with you tomorrow night." Celeste slid a single-typed page across to me. 7:30 arrival, 8 o'clock opening remarks, 8:15 divorce complaint served, 8:20 Wells notice, 8:25 Owen's testimony. Every move timed to the minute. I studied each line, a schedule of my son's undoing. 200 people will be in that room, Clifford said. Investors, press, business figures. There will be no containing this. Good, Nadine said. The word came out almost gently, but there was iron underneath it. Every one of them has a right to know. I creased the page once and tucked it away. Tomorrow night, I told them, looking at each face in that circle, people who had given 6 weeks to building something airtight. Derek thinks he's walking into his greatest triumph. He is hosting a party on money belonging to 23 families. He does not know what is waiting for him. We filed out of the church at 9:30. The night had stayed cold, the stars hard and clear over the parking lot. Monday was coming, the 10th anniversary gala for Colby Capital Management, the night it all ended. The 22nd floor ballroom of the Post Oak Hotel burned gold under its chandeliers, champagne. Houston spread wide and glittering through the floor-to-ceiling glass, and my son commanding the center of the room like a man who had never once entertained the possibility that any of it could be taken from him. 150 guests in evening wear, their voices weaving under the string quartets playing, filled the marble space. White-jacketed servers threaded the crowd with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres. Expensive perfume and cut flowers, orchids, white roses, crystal vases placed on every surface. Derek worked the room the way a man does when the room belongs to him entirely. Navy suit, white shirt, pockets, square set just so. Handshakes, embraces, laughter at things I was too far away to catch. From my spot near the entrance, I could only watch the performance. Every single movement said I cannot be touched. I'd walked in at 7:45 p.m., in the same charcoal suit I'd worn into federal depositions for 30 years. Nadine's text had been clear on the timing, late enough that Derek has no opening to make a scene before everyone's assembled, early enough to be seen when he speaks. He spotted me the instant I came through the door. 3 full seconds, the smile dropped, something unguarded moving across his face. Then the mask settled back smooth and easy, and he came across the floor toward me. "Dad." He pulled me in. "All of it for the room watching. I didn't think you'd make it." "Wouldn't miss it, son." His cologne hit hard. The hand on my shoulder wasn't warmth, it was a statement. "Look at this. My own father stands here with me. A photographer materialized at his elbow. Mr. Colby, could we do a quick photo? Father and son, 10 years of success." We stood together, his arm around me, and we both smiled. The shutter fired 3 times. I was thinking about the USB drive against my ribs, and I kept right on smiling. "Perfect. Thank you." The photographer stepped away, and Derek brought his mouth close to my ear, his voice dropping to almost nothing. "About Saturday, the insurance paperwork. That conversation isn't finished. Later, son, this is your night." He held my gaze a moment longer, searching for something I wasn't going to give him. Then a voice across the room called his name, and he turned, drawn back into the crowd of investors who had not yet learned that their money was already gone. I worked the room with my eyes moving table to table. Norbert Fenn at table 6, tuxedo, that looked like it came off a rental rack, champagne flute in hand. The man who had put $400,000 into my son's fund because he believed I stood behind it. 3 tables back, a couple in their 70s, fingers intertwined her jewelry. Understated, his suit worn, but freshly pressed. Another entry on Clifford's victim list. At table 8, Darius Kemper, Derek's closest friend going back to their college days. A man who had watched his entire retirement savings vanish 2 weeks ago and still had no idea the whole thing was built on lies. 150 people raising glasses to the man who had taken everything from them. I spotted Nadine near the bar. Black dress I'd never laid eyes on, hair drawn back tight. She looked beautiful and brittle both at once, the way glass looks right before it gives. Our eyes connected across the crowd. The smallest nod. We were ready. At exactly 8 p.m., Derek stepped up to the microphone at the front of the room. The string quartet brought their number to a close, and the conversations dropped away. "Thank you all for being here tonight." His voice rolled through the sound system, smooth, unhurried, in command. 10 years ago, I launched Colby Capital Management around a straightforward idea: help families grow real, lasting wealth through steady, disciplined investing. When I look out at this room at clients who placed their trust in me, some of you from the very beginning, I feel nothing but gratitude. Applause moved through the crowd. I stood at the back wall, hands in my pockets, and I watched. "This road hasn't always been easy," Derek went on, "but every difficulty we faced it together. And there's something I need to address tonight because there has been talk." He let the pause stretch. A few uncomfortable laughs scattered across the room. "My wife Nadine," he gestured her way, "the woman beside me, for 10 years. My partner in everything this firm has become. There are those who would drive a wedge between us, who have been circulating rumors about our marriage. Let me be absolutely plain. She isn't going anywhere." He raised his glass. "To Nadine. To loyalty. To the next 10 years. The room answered with applause and lifted drinks. Nadine's smile was flawless and hollow. I glanced toward the entrance doors. A man in a charcoal suit stood near the threshold, briefcase in hand, observing the scene with the detached composure of someone who had spent years doing exactly this. Elliot Crane, 48, SEC enforcement attorney, positioned to serve the Wells notice that would set federal civil enforcement in motion. At 8:12 p.m., the main doors swung open again. Celeste Dunmore came into the ballroom wearing a midnight blue suit, a black leather folder tucked under one arm. She moved to the side wall and went, still waiting. The string quartet picked up a new piece, something bright and celebratory. Derek had come down off the small stage and was moving through congratulations, absorbing the applause. I looked at my watch. 8:13 p.m., 2 minutes. The last note from the quartet hung in the air and faded, and in the hush that followed, I became aware of my own heartbeat. The ballroom settled into an expectant quiet. Guests assumed another speech was coming, another toast. The servers stopped making their rounds. Even the bartender held still. Celeste stepped away from the wall. Her heels struck the marble in a clean, measured rhythm, the sound of a clock running out. 1 step, 2, 3. 150 faces turned toward her. Derek was near table 4, champagne in hand, mid-sentence with an investor. He glanced up, following the collective gaze, and saw Celeste moving toward him with the calm of someone who had done this before. The smile locked in place and stopped working. She crossed the floor in complete silence. Nobody said a word. The only sounds were her footsteps on marble and the low hum of the air system. I kept my back against the wall and watched my son's world start to come apart. Nadine rose from the table where she had been sitting beside Derek, and in that silent ballroom I watched my daughter-in-law walk away from her husband across the marble toward her attorney, toward the truth, while 150 pairs of eyes followed every step. She didn't look back. Each heel strike was its own statement, deliberate and final. When she reached Celeste, she turned to face the room, faced Derek standing there next to the woman who carried the papers that would dissolve their marriage. Celeste opened the black leather folder. Derek Colby. She said, her voice level, professional, and perfectly audible through the sound system because someone had left the microphone live. You are hereby served with summons for dissolution of marriage, complete asset disclosure, and complaint for elder financial abuse under Georgia Code. She extended the documents. Derek didn't reach for them. The color left his face entirely. Celeste set the papers on the nearest table. Service is complete. You have 30 days to respond. The ballroom stayed absolutely still. Not a soul moved. Somewhere a phone buzzed, a ringtone nobody answered in the stunned silence. Then Elliot Crane stepped away from his spot near the bar. Trim, composed briefcase where a champagne glass would have been. He crossed to Derek with the same unhurried professionalism Celeste had just shown. Mr. Colby, this is formal notice of SEC enforcement proceedings for violations of securities law. He placed a thick envelope in Derek's hands. The Wells notice contains preliminary findings of civil securities fraud. You have the right to legal representation. The commission will be in touch with your attorney regarding next steps. Elliot stepped back. Derek stood there holding the envelope as though it might detonate. A chair dragged across marble. Norbert Fenn pushed himself to his feet at table 6, 72 years old, rented tuxedo, hands trembling. 30 years as a CPA before he retired. When he spoke, his voice carried the quiet weight of a man who had spent his career finding truth in numbers. I placed $400,000 into this firm because I trusted the father of Derek Colby. He looked straight at Derek. I want everyone in this room to understand I am far from the only one. The figure hung there like a verdict. $400,000. I watched 3 more heads lift in recognition, a woman at table 8, a couple at table 3. They knew that number. They had lived what it cost. More people were on their feet now, a man near the windows, 2 women at a table by the far wall. The room was fracturing, some guests moving toward the exits, others reaching for their phones, a few pressing closer to Derek as though they needed answers that instant. No sirens, no handcuffs. Just the plain truth spoken aloud in a room where everyone present had a stake in hearing it. Derek's eyes swept the crowd faces he had been charming with easy lies 10 minutes ago, and then they found me standing against the back wall. He came across the floor. The crowd gave way. When he stopped in front of me, his voice had shed every last layer of polish. You betrayed your own son. 150 people held their breath. I looked at the man I had raised, the boy I'd steadied on a bicycle, the college graduate who had once made me proud. The CEO who had built his wealth by gutting families. I moved a step closer, close enough that it might have looked private, but I didn't lower my voice. I wanted the room to hear it. No, I said, steady, calm. I didn't betray you. I protected my granddaughter. I let that land. And I protected the memory of your mother, who would have been utterly ashamed of what she saw in you tonight. Derek's face broke apart. For just a moment, I could see the boy he used to be exposed, frightened, real. Then something tried to reassemble the mask and found there was nothing left to hold it up. I turned my back on my son and walked away without looking back. The room erupted behind me, voices colliding, chairs scraping stone, somebody shouting questions into the noise, the sound of a world coming down all at once. I went through the side door and out onto the terrace. The November air hit sharp and clean. 22 floors above Houston, the city ran out in every direction, a lit grid pushing toward the horizon, traffic threading the streets below office towers, still glowing, people down there moving through ordinary Monday evenings with no knowledge of what had just happened up here. I closed both hands on the terrace railing, the metal cold against my palms. Through the glass behind me, I could see it all, guests pressing in from every angle, phones raised. Derek encircled by people demanding answers he had none to give. Nadine standing with Celeste, her posture straight and certain. Clifford had materialized somewhere and was in conversation with Elliot Crane. Owen Thorne was passing a hard drive to someone across the room. The last of the evidence delivered exactly as planned. The machinery was running now: divorce proceedings, SEC investigation, criminal referrals, 23 families moving toward civil suits, asset freezes, coverage that would break tonight and run for months. It was finished. The terrace air was cold against my face, and 22 floors below Houston kept moving, indifferent, oblivious, alive. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly, deliberately, for the first time in 6 weeks. The pressure that had been accumulating since Nadine's text, since the POA document, since the moment I understood my son was a criminal. It released. Not relief exactly. Something closer to deep, bone-level exhaustion. 6 weeks of constructing a case against my own child, recording his confession, working alongside attorneys and federal investigators, mapping his public unraveling down to the minute. And now it was over. I opened my eyes. The Houston skyline reached out in every direction. The city my son had meant to conquer, the investors he'd defrauded, the families whose retirement he'd gutted, they would get their justice. Not every dollar back in all likelihood, but justice. Cora would grow up knowing her grandfather had chosen what was right over what was easy. And somewhere I hoped my wife, 3 years gone, could rest, knowing I had guarded what mattered. I stood alone on that terrace, both hands on the railing, the grid of city lights spread out below me. Behind me, through the glass, the ballroom churned, questions, accusations, the first tremors of consequence. I took another breath, let it go slowly. It was finished. By 8:45 p.m., half the guests had drained out of the ballroom, and my son was marooned in the middle of the thinning space, trying to talk to people who had stopped listening. I watched from near the bar as Derek mounted one defense after another, his voice climbing with each failed attempt to pull the room back. This is a liquidity challenge, not fraud. My wife engineered this to destroy me. He gestured toward where Nadine had been standing, but she had crossed to the far end of the ballroom with Celeste. Everything presented here tonight is stripped of context. The SEC doesn't grasp what disciplined investment strategy actually looks like. A man near table 8 turned and walked toward the exit. A woman followed. Then another couple. The room was bleeding out, and Derek's voice grew more ragged with each passing minute. I've delivered consistent returns for 10 years. 10 years. You've all seen your statements. Fabricated statements. Someone said, low, flat, certain. I couldn't place the voice. Derek's face went red. I'm offering every client full transparency tomorrow morning, an independent audit, open books. But the room was no longer his. The same ballroom that had applauded him 90 minutes ago now treated him like an obstacle, something to step around on the way to the door. Near the windows, Norbert Fenn stood in a tight cluster with 5 other investors. 3 couples, all past 65, all on Clifford's victim list. Elliot Crane, the SEC attorney, stood among them with a notepad, listening as they spoke in low, pressing voices. How many of us are there? Norbert asked. 23 households confirmed, Elliot said. Likely more once the investigation broadens. How do we coordinate for restitution? The commission will appoint a receiver. You'll each be contacted within 10 days. They weren't watching Derek. Nobody was watching Derek anymore. Not as a CEO, not as someone whose words still carried weight. Just a 40-year-old man standing alone with what he'd done. At 9:15 p.m., Nadine walked toward the exit with Celeste. She passed within 15 feet of Derek. He watched her go. She didn't glance back. He made no move to stop her. The ballroom was nearly vacant now. White-jacketed servers worked the tables clearing glasses and linen. The string quartet had broken down their instruments an hour ago. Outside, camera flashes strobed the street media crews waiting for statements for footage for the story that would lead Houston business coverage for weeks. Elliot Crane came back to Derek with additional paperwork. Emergency asset freeze orders, deposition schedules, formal notice that all business accounts were now under federal oversight. Derek accepted the documents without reading them. By 10 o'clock, he had lowered himself into a chair at an abandoned table surrounded by empty champagne flutes and discarded napkins. He looked like a child who had wandered somewhere he didn't belong. I had walked out of that ballroom at 9 p.m. sharp and never looked back, not once. The machinery of justice, once you set it running, moves with its own systematic rhythm. Clifford called Tuesday morning. SEC is formalizing civil enforcement. 4 weeks from Wells' notice to filed complaint. We're ahead of schedule. DOJ is also reviewing for criminal indictment wire fraud, securities fraud. They're building it methodically. I sat in my kitchen with my coffee watching November light come through the window. How long? 6 months at minimum, possibly longer. Federal cases don't move fast. After the gala, Derek surrendered his passport as a condition of supervised release. No charges filed yet, but the investigation made him a flight risk. He was confined to Georgia pending DOJ's decision. Celeste called on November 2nd. The fraudulent mortgage has been canceled. Court order executed this morning. Cora's home is legally secured, title restored to Nadine, clear of all encumbrances. The mandatory 31-day waiting period for the divorce cleared November 17th. The decree will be final December 18th, before Christmas. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes, not looking at anything in particular. Cora's home was safe. Nadine was free. The families Derek had defrauded would have their day in court. Civil restitution running through an SEC-appointed receiver. Criminal prosecution pending. The system grinding forward, slow, methodical, unstoppable. And I was just a witness now. The case I'd assembled, the recording, the forensic analysis, the months of coordination with Clifford and Celeste and Owen, it all belonged to the federal machinery. They no longer needed me. Owen Thorne's internal ledgers had handed them everything: the shell companies, the fabricated returns, the systematic cycle of using new investor money to pay old investor redemptions. Textbook Ponzi structure documented in meticulous detail by the CFO who had watched it from the inside and finally decided he'd seen enough. Clifford called again on November 10th. SEC filed civil enforcement this morning. Lifetime asset monitoring. Restitution orders covering all 23 families. Permanent bar from the securities industry. What's the timeline for criminal? DOJ won't commit, but they're moving. Grand jury convenes in January. I hung up and realized something. I hadn't thought about Derek in 3 days. It was mid-November when I sat at my kitchen table with the SEC civil enforcement filing printed out in front of me, 47 pages of findings, evidence, and proposed remedies. Lifetime asset monitoring. Restitution orders payable to 23 victim families through an appointed receiver. Permanent prohibition from acting as an investment advisor. Supervised probation pending the DOJ criminal trial. My son. My only child. The boy I had raised. The man I had tried to teach that integrity was non-negotiable. He was looking at financial ruin and the real possibility of federal prison. I didn't know honestly what I felt about that. Grief, maybe for the son he could have been for the family none of us would ever recover. Relief, certainly, that Cora was safe, that Nadine was free, that 23 families would see some measure of what they were owed. Anger, no. That had burned off. What was left was exhaustion. I closed the document and set it aside. My phone buzzed, a text from Cora asking about her father. Can we talk this week? I stared at the screen. Eventually, there would be a conversation I couldn't postpone, sitting across from my granddaughter and finding words to explain why her father wasn't coming home, why the family she'd known had come apart, why her grandfather had made the choice he made. But not tonight. Tonight I would sit in my quiet house, read the paper, eat a simple dinner, and go to bed at a reasonable hour. And for the first time since August, since Nadine's panicked text, since the POA document, since the moment I had grasped the full reach of what Derek had built, when I closed my eyes, I could sleep. Cora's laughter rang through the bare rooms of Nadine's new Midtown Houston apartment as I carried the last box through the door, and for the first time in 6 months, the sound didn't feel fragile. "Grandpa, come see my room." She seized my hand and pulled me down the hall. Sunlight poured through uncovered windows. The apartment smelled of fresh paint and open space. Nadine stood by the front door watching us, a quiet smile on her face. She looked lighter, as though she'd been bearing invisible weight for years and had finally put it down. I found Cora spinning in circles in the center of her new room, arms flung wide claiming the space as hers. It's bigger than my old room and I get to paint it any color I want. What are you thinking, purple? Or maybe blue? She spun again. And you'll come visit all the time, right? Every week, I promised. When I came back to the living room, Nadine was still standing at the door, new keys in her hand. She pressed one into the deadbolt, locked it, unlocked it, locked it again, unlocked it. What are you doing? I asked quietly. She looked up, eyes bright. I just wanted to feel it, Dad. Locking a door and knowing I am the only person on earth who holds the key. I understood then. For 8 months, every door she'd locked, Derek had a key. Every space she'd claimed he had monitored. Every boundary she'd tried to draw, he'd crossed. This door was hers now. She turned the key one more time, feeling the deadbolt catch solid, certain. Then she pocketed his keys and dried her eyes. Cora came running out. Grandpa, will you stay tonight? I looked over at Nadine. She nodded. Yes, I said, I am. The deposition table was sterile gray attorneys flanking both sides. Late November, a conference room somewhere downtown. Derek sat across from me, looking as though he'd aged 10 years in 6 weeks. We were there for procedural matters, asset disclosure, timeline, confirmation for the divorce decree. The attorneys handled most of it, passing documents back and forth in legal language. Then Derek said something his lawyers couldn't get in front of. Can you ever forgive me, Dad? The room went still. His attorney touched his arm. Don't say anything further. But Derek kept his eyes on me, waiting. The silence ran maybe 20 seconds. It felt like 20 years. All the birthday parties and graduations and Sunday dinners that had somehow delivered us to this cold, airless room. I turned the question over, what forgiveness meant, whether I even had standing to withhold it when the person he'd hurt most was Cora, who still asked about her daddy every night. I don't know, I said at last, but I won't carry hatred for you. Hatred takes energy, and I've promised every ounce I have left to your daughter. Derek lowered his head and stared at his hands resting on the table, hands that had executed fraudulent documents, routed stolen funds, threatened his own father. Hands that had once been small enough to disappear entirely inside mine. Okay, he whispered. The attorneys resumed. Documents were signed, timeline confirmed. The divorce decree would be final December 18th. I walked out of that conference room at 3:47 p.m., knowing it was the last time I would look at my son's face for a very long time. I drove home and didn't cry until I pulled into my own driveway. A few days before Christmas, Celeste called me to her office. Nadine was already there when I arrived, looking puzzled. What's this about? Nadine asked. Celeste opened a file on her desk. Harlan executed an irrevocable trust 4 months ago, May, the same month the anomalies first surfaced. His entire estate, $2.3 million, is locked in trust for Cora's benefit until she reaches age 25. Nadine looked at me, then back at Celeste. I don't understand. It means Derek cannot touch a single penny. Celeste went on federal bankruptcy, receivers cannot reach it either. The trust is sovereign. And you, Nadine, are named sole trustee. Nadine's hand went to her mouth. Your father set this up before any of the investigation got underway, Celeste said. Before the recordings, before the gala, before he even knew there would be a plan. The moment he suspected something was wrong, he moved to protect Cora's inheritance. Nadine turned to face me, tears running freely. How long did you know, Dad? I thought back to the exact moment I had stopped trusting my son. From the moment he stopped asking me a single detail about his mother's life, I said quietly. Over 3 years of my grief, not one question. A man who genuinely understands love doesn't erase the people he ought to remember. Derek had never once asked me to tell him about his mother after she died. Never wanted to know her favorite flowers or the songs she hummed over the stove. He had moved forward as though she were a closed chapter, convenient to leave behind. That was when I had known something essential was broken in him. Nadine's hand trembled as she held the trust documents, and it struck me that she had walked into this room braced to lose everything, and I had just told her she never would. The trust generates approximately $70,000 annually for Cora's expenses. Education, healthcare, living costs, Celeste explained. At 25, she receives the principal. Nadine was crying openly now. Dad, I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything. I reached across and took her hand. Cora is the only thing that matters now. Everything else is just wreckage. Nadine signed the documents accepting trusteeship and the fiduciary responsibility that came with it. When we were done, she left to collect Cora from school. Celeste walked me to the door and looked at me with something close to awe. You set that trust up 4 months ago before any of this began. How did you know? I thought about Derek at his mother's funeral 3 years ago, phone in hand during the eulogy. The way he'd talked about his investors as though they were marks. The moment I'd recognized that the man in front of me was someone I no longer knew. My son spent years assuming I was just an old man waiting out his time, I said. Turns out I was waiting for him to show his hand. I stepped out into the December afternoon. Christmas lights already strung across the storefronts. Houston moving toward the holidays, families gathering traditions, continuing life, persisting. And somewhere across town, Cora was getting out of school, eager to tell her mother about her day, secure in a future her grandfather had walled off before she ever knew it needed protecting. The December morning air smelled of cold earth and winter birds. For the first time in 6 months, my mind held nothing but that: no calculations, no evidence chains, no next move, just the garden and the quiet. I was out back staking the tomato plants in my backyard, working through the dormant beds, when I heard small feet crossing the yard behind me. Grandpa! Cora came running toward me in an orange jacket and mismatched gloves, her breath clouding in the cold air. What are the names of these? I smiled. Hybrid tea roses. This one's called Peace Yellow with pink edges. That one's Mr. Lincoln. Deep red. She crouched down beside me. Can I help? I handed her the small watering can. Water the base, not the leaves. The roots are drinking while the leaves stay safe from winter blight. She poured carefully, tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration. The water soaked slowly into the frozen ground. They look dead, she said. I touched one of the pruned stems, brown brittle. They're sleeping, I told her, saving their energy for spring. Cora studied the bare stems and the gray, frozen earth the garden stripped of every color. Then she looked up at me with the particular gravity of an 8-year-old turning something over. Will the flowers come back in spring? I looked at the dormant beds, this garden that had come through 30 winters since my wife put the first rose in the ground. Yes, I said. They always do. She smiled and ran back inside. I stayed out there working through the rest of the pruning, clearing dead growth, turning the beds over, preparing them for whatever came next. The work asked nothing of me beyond the next cut. When I came in, Nadine was making coffee. She'd started keeping a spare key, letting herself in on Saturday mornings, so the three of us could share breakfast before Cora's dance class. Late December, nearing Christmas. Nadine and I sat together on the back porch with our cups in the very spot where all of this had begun 6 months ago. Same chairs, same view of the garden, but the pressure that had settled on my chest that August evening was gone. Nadine wrapped both hands around her mug. Do you have any regrets, Dad? I turned it over honestly. The recording, the gala, walking away from my son while he stood there alone with what he'd built. I only regret I didn't see it clearly enough to move sooner, I said. But no regrets about what was done. Nadine nodded slowly. Neither do I. We sat in a quiet that needed nothing added to it. The choices made the investigation, the exposure, the public unraveling were choices we could carry. Nadine took the call from Derek and I understood she was protecting me now, the way I had protected her. The circle closes and I was grateful to let someone else bear the weight. Grandpa Cora's voice came from inside. The phone's ringing. It's Dad calling from the facility. Nadine and I traded a long look. Derek had been calling once a week from the supervised residence where he was living while the trial worked its way forward. Cora always took the calls talking about school and dance class. She didn't understand the full scope of what her father had done. Maybe one day she would. Not today. Nadine stood. Go on inside, Dad. I'll take this one. She went in and through the window I could hear her voice, measured, civil, holding a line. Derek, she's doing homework right now. You can call back tomorrow at 3. I stayed on the porch. The winter garden lay before me, bare stems, frozen ground, dormant life resting toward spring. My wife had put these roses in the earth 30 years ago. She had tended them through every season until cancer took her 3 years back. I'd kept them going since holding off the blight that came for them each winter. She would have known what to do about Derek. She always read people more clearly than I did, but she wasn't here, and I had done what had to be done. I thought about my son, not the 40-year-old executive who had constructed a Ponzi scheme, the 8-year-old boy who used to go slack against my shoulder in front of the television, the college graduate who had held on so hard at commencement that I thought my ribs might give. Somewhere between that boy and the man who had stood in that ballroom, something had come apart, and I hadn't seen it clearly enough until there was nothing left to stop. 3 generations. 1 had taken a dark road. 2 still had their future ahead of them. I rose and stepped through the doorway into the warmth of my house. My wife's photograph hung in the hallway, the same frame, the same spot it had held for 6 years. She was smiling, wearing the blue dress she'd always loved, standing in the rose garden at full bloom. I stopped and looked at her face. For the first time since August, I could hold her gaze without shame. "I did what I could," I whispered. "I protected Cora. I'm sorry I couldn't save him." I knew what she would have said. "You did what was right. That's all anyone can do." I walked on into the kitchen where Cora was setting the table for breakfast, and Nadine was at the stove working on scrambled eggs. The phone call was behind them now. They were laughing about something, and Cora was demonstrating a dance move. "Grandpa, watch." She spun with her arms flung wide. "Beautiful," I said. I took my seat and accepted the coffee Nadine poured. We ate breakfast together, three people piecing together something new from what the old had left behind. People ask what I learned in 28 years of financial investigation. I give them the technical answers, tracing assets, following paper trails, recognizing the patterns that give fraud away. But the real lesson, the one I came to understand at 69 years old, is something different. The most dangerous person is never the stranger you've never met. It is the person you have known so long you stopped truly seeing them. I looked at Cora across the table, her face lit up with laughter. I would never stop looking. The investigation was finished, my son was gone, but my granddaughter was safe, her future secured, and the roses would come back in spring. Justice and peace are not the same thing. But sometimes if you're fortunate and you make the hardest choices when they count most, you find a way to live with both. If you stayed with me all the way to the end of this one, thank you, truly. This story cost more than I expected to carry. There is no clean victory when the person you are standing against is someone you raised. What I walked away with was not triumph. It was a kind of quiet, the kind that only comes when you have done the hard thing and can finally set it down. I believe God does not always make the right path easy, but He does make it clear if you are willing to look. That clarity came slowly for me, but it came. For those of you following along with these grandpa revenge stories, and for anyone who has ever faced a moment where love and duty pulled in opposite directions, here is what I would tell you. First, trust is not a feeling, it is a pattern. Watch the pattern over time, not just the moments that feel good. Second, protecting the people who cannot protect themselves is not betrayal, it is the whole point of being family. Third, when someone tries to use your age or your silence against you, that is the moment to become very, very still and very, very precise. Fourth, document everything. Not out of suspicion, but out of love for the truth. These are the kinds of father stories that don't get told enough, the ones where an old man refuses to be a footnote in someone else's scheme. If this story moved you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me what stayed with you. And if you haven't already come find me here on Grandpa's Revenge, there are more stories where this one came from. Thank you for listening. Take good care of the ones you love.